My son thought he was smart, hiding a military-grade tracker under my rusted truck. He thought he was tracking a senile old man who had lost his grip on reality. But when I mailed that device 500 miles north to Canada, I did not just confuse him. I triggered a call from a hitman who was waiting for me to leave my driveway. And that is when I realized my own family was not just watching me, they were hunting me. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on them, let me know in the comments if you have ever trusted the wrong person. Hit like and subscribe if you enjoy stories where the underdog bites back. It was 6 in the morning on a Tuesday. The sun had barely cracked the horizon, casting a gray, gloomy light over my neighborhood in South Atlanta. My coffee was still too hot to sip when the pounding started on my front door. I was not expecting anyone. My friends know better than to drop by unannounced before sunrise, and the mailman does not run this early. I set my mug down on the Formica counter, the one with the chip on the corner that my late wife Sarah always meant to fix. I walked to the door, my joints protesting with the morning stiffness that comes with being 67 years old. When I opened the door, I found my son Darius standing on the porch. He looked like he had run a marathon. Sweat was beading on his forehead despite the morning chill, and his eyes were darting around the street as if he expected the police to roll up at any second. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, unable to look me in the eye. He wore a designer jacket that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, but it looked disheveled, like he had slept in it. "Dad, I need to check your truck," he said, his voice breathless and high-pitched. I stared at him. He had not visited me in 3 months, not since he asked for a loan to cover some bad investment in cryptocurrency. Now he was here at dawn, worried about my vehicle. "Check my truck," I repeated, keeping my voice flat. "Darius, it is a 1998 Ford F-150. It has 300,000 miles on it. The only thing holding it together is rust and prayer. What is there to check?" "I just had a nightmare, Dad," he stammered finally, meeting my gaze though his eyes were wide and frantic. "I dreamt your brakes failed on the highway. It felt so real. Please just give me the keys. I need to check the brake lines. I will not be able to sleep until I know you are safe." I looked at my son. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that this 32-year-old man who I had raised to be honest and strong was actually concerned for his old father. But my gut told me something was wrong. His hands were shaking. He was not here for the brakes. But I decided to play along. I reached into the bowl by the door and tossed him the keys. "Knock yourself out," I said. "I will pour you a coffee." No, coffee," he said, catching the keys and already turning away. "I have to be quick. Paige is waiting for me. We have a brunch reservation." He ran down the driveway toward my truck, which was parked on the street. I did not go to the kitchen. Instead, I stepped back into the shadows of my living room and moved to the window. I tilted the blinds just enough to see out without being seen. I watched my son. He did not pop the hood. He did not check the tires. He did not crawl under the wheel wells to look at the brake lines. He went straight to the rear bumper. He lay on his back on the cold asphalt and shimmied underneath the bed of the truck. He was down there for maybe 10 seconds. Then I saw his hand reach into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small black object no bigger than a deck of cards. I saw his arm extend upward toward the chassis. Click. Even through the glass, I imagined I could hear the magnetic snap of metal on metal. He scrambled out from under the truck, wiped his grease-stained hands on his expensive jeans, and stood up. He took a deep breath, looking relieved. He dropped my keys in the mailbox, got into his leased BMW, and sped off without even waving goodbye. I stood by the window for a long time. My coffee had gone cold. My heart was beating a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It was the rhythm of disappointment. I walked out to the mailbox, retrieved my keys, and walked over to my truck. I lay down on the asphalt right where my son had been. I slid underneath. There it was, tucked up inside the rear bumper, hidden from casual view. A black box with a small red light blinking rhythmically. It was a GPS tracker, and not the cheap kind you buy at an electronics store to find your lost keys. This was a heavy-duty, real-time tracking device, the kind private investigators or jealous spouses use. I stared at the blinking red light. It felt like an invasion. My own son was tracking me. Why? I am a retired mechanic. My days consist of going to the grocery store, maybe the hardware store, and occasionally visiting the cemetery to talk to Sarah. I live in a modest house in a gentrifying neighborhood. I drive a truck that is worth less than the tires it rolls on. What did Darius think he was going to find? Did he think I was hiding a secret fortune? Did he think I was meeting someone? My hand reached out to rip the device off, to smash it against the pavement until it was nothing but plastic shards and wires. That was the anger speaking. That was the hurt, Father wanting to lash out. But 40 years of navigating the business world, 40 years of building things from nothing, had taught me patience. If I destroyed it, Darius would know I found it. He would know I was onto him. And if he was desperate enough to track me, he was desperate enough to do something else if this plan failed. No. I needed to know why, and I needed to make him show his hand. I gently pried the magnet off the chassis. I held the tracker in my hand. It was cold and heavy. I walked into my garage, my mind racing. I needed this tracker to move. I needed it to go somewhere far away, somewhere that would confuse the hell out of him. I looked at the workbench where I keep my fishing gear. There was a box sitting there, taped up and ready to go. It was a care package of custom lures and dried spices I had promised to send to my old friend Cyrus. Cyrus was a retired detective who had moved up north to Toronto, Canada to spend his golden years freezing by a lake. I smiled, a cold, humorless smile. I opened the box. I wrapped the GPS tracker in thick bubble wrap to muffle any sound it might make and tucked it deep inside the box, right between a jar of Cajun seasoning and a new fishing reel. I sealed the box with heavy-duty tape. I printed a new express shipping label, Priority Overnight International. Then I took out my phone. I saw a text from Darius. "Everything looked good, Dad. Brakes are solid. XR. Just drive safe, okay? Especially at night. Do not go out unless you have to," I typed back. "Thanks, son. I appreciate you looking out for me. I am just going to stay home and rest my old bones." I hit send. Then I got in my truck with the package on the passenger seat and drove to the shipping center. I watched the clerk scan the label. I watched him toss the box into the bin that would head to the airport. "Safe travels," I whispered. I drove home, parked the truck in the exact same spot, and waited. The silence in my house felt different now. It was not peaceful anymore. It was heavy. It was the silence of a waiting room before a bad diagnosis. I sat in my armchair, the leather worn smooth over the years, and looked at the photos on the mantel. There was Darius at his graduation, smiling proud. There was Darius and Paige at their wedding, looking like royalty. Paige with her blonde hair and perfect smile, looking at me with what I thought was affection. I had welcomed her into the family. I had ignored the little comments she made about the neighborhood, about the house being old, about how I should sell and move to a retirement community. I thought she just wanted me to be comfortable. Now I wondered if she was the one pressing the buttons. Darius was weak. He always had been. He wanted the easy life, the fast cars, the big status, but he did not want to put in the work. Paige was different. She was sharp. She was hungry. 12 hours passed. The sun went down. The streetlights flickered on, casting long orange shadows across my lawn. I made myself a sandwich for dinner, but I could barely swallow it. I kept checking my phone, waiting for Darius to call, waiting for him to ask why I was moving at 500 miles an hour toward the Canadian border. But he didn't call. Instead, at 8:30 p.m., my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I did not recognize. It was blocked. I hesitated. I usually do not answer blocked numbers, but my instincts were screaming that this was connected. I picked up the phone and held it to my ear without saying a word. For a moment there was only static, then a voice. It was digitally altered, deep and distorted like a demon speaking through a tin can. "Bernie Freeman," the voice said. "Who is this?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. The voice ignored my question. "Why is the signal moving north, old man? You are supposed to be home. You are supposed to be in that truck driving on the highway tonight." My blood ran cold. This wasn't Darius. Darius would have asked why I was flying. Darius would have sounded confused. This person sounded angry. This person sounded professional. "I am home," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who are you talking to?" "Do not lie to me," the voice hissed. "The tracker says you are crossing state lines. You are moving too fast. We had a deal. I cannot do the job if you are not in the vehicle." "What job?" I demanded. "The job your son paid for," the voice said, and then the line clicked dead. I sat there in the dark living room, the phone still pressed to my ear, the dial tone humming like a flat line. "The job your son paid for." The words bounced around my skull. The tracker wasn't just to see where I was going, it was to signal someone who was waiting for me. The brakes. Darius had mentioned the brakes. He hadn't checked them, but he had planted the idea of a malfunction in my head. If I had driven that truck tonight, if I had gone out on the highway like the voice expected, what would have happened? A crash. A terrible tragic accident involving an old man and a rusty truck. And suddenly I wasn't just a disappointed father. I was a target. I stood up and went to the window. I looked out at the street. It was empty, but it didn't feel empty. I felt eyes on the house. I realized then that I didn't know my son at all. I didn't know the woman he married. And I certainly didn't know who we were. I needed to think. I needed to understand what they were after. They thought I was poor. They thought I lived on a meager social security check. Why kill a poor old man? Unless I wasn't as poor as they thought, or unless I was worth more dead than alive. I went to the back room, the one I keep locked. I moved the old bookshelf aside and opened the wall safe hidden behind it. Inside were the documents I had never shown Darius. The deeds, the stock certificates, the ownership papers for Freeman Logistics, the warehousing company I had built from one single delivery van into an empire of industrial real estate across 3 states. I had stepped down as CEO 5 years ago, putting a board of directors in charge so I could mourn Sarah and live a simple life. I wore old clothes, I drove an old truck, I lived in an old house. I did it because I wanted to know who loved me for me and who loved me for the checkbook. I did it because I wanted Darius to make his own way, to struggle a little, to build character before I handed him the keys to the kingdom. But it seemed Darius didn't want to build character. He wanted to inherit it. I closed the safe. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a rage that was starting to boil deep in my gut. They wanted to play games. They wanted to track me like an animal. They wanted to erase me. I took the battery out of my phone. I went to my computer and pulled up the security feed from the hidden camera I had installed in the oak tree across the street, another precaution from my days in the logistics business where trucks got hijacked and warehouses got raided. I rewound the footage to 6 a.m. I saw Darius's BMW pull up, but then I saw something else. Parked at the corner half a block down was a silver Mercedes. It was idling. As Darius ran up my driveway, the window of the Mercedes rolled down just an inch. Cigarette smoke curled out. I zoomed in. It was grainy, but I knew that car. I knew that profile. It was Paige, my daughter-in-law. She had been there the whole time, watching him, making sure he did it. They were in this together. And then headlights swept across my living room window. A car was pulling into my driveway. I looked at the clock. It was almost midnight. I peeked through the curtain. It was Darius and Paige. They were getting out of the car and they looked terrified. I unlocked the front door and sat back down in my chair, forcing my breathing to slow, forcing my face to relax into the mask of the confused, tired old man they thought I was. The door burst open. Dad Darius yelled, rushing in. "Dad, are you here?" I blinked, pretending to wake up from a nap. "Darius, what is going on?" "It is midnight." He stopped in the middle of the room, staring at me. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Paige came in behind him, her face pale, her hands clutching her designer purse so hard her knuckles were white. "Oh, thank God," Paige breathed out, her voice trembling. We thought something happened to you." "What could happen to me?" I asked, leaning forward. "I have been here all night, watching TV, sleeping." "Why would you think something happened?" Darius looked at Paige. Paige looked at Darius. They were scrambling. They had seen the tracker move. They had probably gotten a call from the cleaner, too, screaming that I was gone. They thought I had fled. They thought the plan was blown. Darius stammered. "I had a feeling, that bad feeling about the brakes again. I called you and you didn't answer. We drove over as fast as we could." I smiled, a slow, tired smile. "My phone died, son. I am fine, just an old man sitting in his old chair." But inside my mind was sharpening. The game had begun, and they had no idea they were playing against the man who wrote the rules. 12 hours had passed since I watched the mail truck carry that black box away. 12 hours of sitting in my armchair in the dark, listening to the house settle around me. The silence should have been peaceful, but it felt heavy, like the air before a tornado touches down. My phone sat on the coffee table, buzzing every few minutes like an angry hornet. It was Darius. He was relentless. "Where are you, Dad? Why aren't you answering? Please tell me you are safe." His texts were frantic. To anyone else, they would look like the concerns of a loving son worried about his elderly father driving a beat-up truck. But I knew better now. I read between the lines. He was not asking if I was safe. He was asking if I was in position. He was watching a little dot on a screen moving further and further away from where I was supposed to be, and panic was setting in. I did not answer him immediately. I let him sweat. I poured myself another cup of tea even though my stomach was in knots and took a sip. When I finally decided to reply, I kept it vague just enough to keep the game going. I am just driving sun clearing my head. The night air feels good. I hit send and watched the screen light up almost instantly with 3 dots. He was typing, then stopping, then typing again. He was confused. The tracker showed I was heading north at a speed that was impossible for a 1998 Ford F-150 unless I had strapped a rocket to the bed. I was messing with his reality and it felt like the only power I had left. But the game changed at exactly 8:30. My phone rang, but this time the screen did not show my son's name. It was a number I did not recognize, a block of random digits that looked like a burner line. My gut tightened. A cold sensation spread from my chest to my fingertips. I stared at the phone. My instincts honed from years of navigating the cutthroat world of logistics and dealing with people who would smile in your face while stealing your wallet screamed at me. This was it. I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened. For a moment there was only the static hiss of a bad connection. Then a voice cut through the noise. It was not Darius. It was not anyone I knew. It was deep, distorted, and mechanical, like someone speaking through a voice changer. "What game are you playing, old man?" I held my breath, my hand gripping the phone so tight my knuckles ached. "Who is this?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear rising in my throat. The voice ignored me. It was cold, professional, and terrifyingly calm. "Why is the signal moving at 500 miles an hour? Why is it crossing the border? You are supposed to be on the ground. You are supposed to be on the highway." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I do not know what you are talking about." I lied. "Do not lie to me," the voice hissed. The anger in it was palpable now. "We had a deal. The client paid for a clean job. I cannot stage a vehicle accident if the vehicle is in the cargo hold of a plane. You are ruining the timeline." The words hit me like physical blows. Stage an accident, clean job, client. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind, forming a picture so ugly I wanted to close my eyes. This was not just surveillance. This was not just my son wanting to know where I hid my cash. This was a hit. "Who are you talking to?" I demanded, trying to buy time, trying to get any information I could. The voice laughed, a harsh metallic sound. "It does not matter who I am. What matters is that you are not where you are supposed to be, and that makes my job very difficult. If you are not in that truck, then where are you?" I did not answer. "You think you are clever sending the device away," the voice continued. "But you just bought yourself a few hours. The contract is open. And I always finish my contracts." The line went dead. I sat there in the dark with the dial tone humming in my ear like a flat line. I felt cold, freezing cold. It was the chill of absolute betrayal. I lowered the phone and looked at it as if it were a venomous snake. That caller. It was not Darius. Darius was a coward. Darius could not look me in the eye when he asked for money, let alone threaten to kill me. Darius was soft. But this man on the phone. He was a professional. He was what they called a cleaner. The realization washed over me. Darius had not just tracked me. He had sold me. He had provided my schedule, my vehicle information, and my route to a third party. My son did not have the stomach to cut the brake lines himself, so he hired someone else to do it. He paid someone to make his father's death look like a tragedy so he could collect the insurance money without getting blood on his designer shoes. I stood up and paced the living room, my mind racing. I had been right to send the tracker away. If I had driven that truck tonight like I usually did on Tuesdays to visit the late-night market, I would be dead. I would be a smudge on the asphalt, a sad story on the morning news about an elderly man losing control of his vehicle. But now they knew. They knew I wasn't in the car. And that meant they would come looking for me here. I could not stay passive. I had to act. I took the battery out of my phone. I walked into the kitchen and threw the SIM card into the garbage disposal, turning it on until I heard the plastic shred into nothing. I was in the dark now, digitally speaking. But I had one advantage they did not know about. They thought I was just Bernie, the retired mechanic living in a gentrifying neighborhood waiting to die. They did not know about the man I used to be. They did not know about the security system I had installed myself years ago when the neighborhood started getting rough. I went to my study, the small room at the back of the house that Darius always ignored. He thought it was full of old newspapers and junk. I moved a stack of dusty boxes aside and opened the panel on the wall, revealing a high-definition monitor connected to a hard drive hidden in the floorboards. I had cameras. Tiny pinhole cameras hidden in the eaves of the roof in the birdhouse by the mailbox and in the old oak tree across the street. I turned on the monitor. The screen flickered to life, showing the street outside. It was empty now, but I needed to see what happened this morning. I needed to see the moment my son betrayed me. I rewound the footage to 6 a.m. There was Darius pulling up in his BMW. I watched him get out looking nervous, wiping sweat from his forehead. I watched him talk to me at the door. I watched him run to my truck and slide underneath. It made me sick to watch it again, knowing what he was doing. He was marking me for death. But then I saw something I had missed from the window. In the corner of the screen, parked half a block down at the intersection, was a silver Mercedes SUV. It was idling. The windows were tinted dark, but as Darius ran back down the driveway after planting the device, the driver's side window rolled down just an inch. A hand emerged holding a slim cigarette. Smoke curled up into the morning air. I zoomed in. The resolution was grainy but clear enough. I knew that car. I knew that hand. I knew the way she held her cigarette between her index and middle finger like she was posing for a picture. It was Paige, my daughter-in-law. She had been there the whole time. She sat in her luxury car watching her husband crawl under his father's truck. She was the supervisor. She was the one making sure he went through with it. I watched as Darius got into his car and drove past her. She didn't follow immediately. She waited a full minute scanning the street, scanning my house. Then she flicked the cigarette onto the pavement and drove off. It hit me then. Darius was the tool, but Paige was the architect. Darius was desperate for money, yes, but he was lazy. He would never come up with a plan this complex. Insurance fraud, hired killers, GPS tracking. This had Paige's fingerprints all over it. She was the one who complained about my old house bringing down the family image. She was the one who asked about my will. She was the one who smiled that fake sweet smile while calculating how much I was worth dead. She was not just supporting him, she was driving him. I sat back in my chair feeling a new kind of anger. It was a cold, sharp rage. They thought I was a senile old fool. They thought I was helpless prey. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost midnight. The cleaner knew I wasn't in Canada. Darius knew I wasn't in Canada. They would be coming here. They had to check. They had to see if the glitch was in the device or if I was playing them. I stood up and walked to the front door. I unlocked it. I turned off the porch light. Then I went to the kitchen and brewed a fresh pot of coffee. I sat down at my kitchen table facing the door and waited. 10 minutes later, headlights swept across the front window. A car engine cut off in the driveway. Car doors slammed. I heard footsteps running up the path. Frantic, heavy footsteps. The door burst open without a knock. Darius rushed in, his face pale, his eyes wide with terror. Paige was right behind him, looking perfectly put together, even in her panic, her eyes scanning the room like a predator. "Dad!" Darius yelled, his voice cracking. "Dad, are you here?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. I set the mug down with a deliberate clink. I looked at them. "I am right here, son," I said calmly. "Why are you screaming?" They froze. They looked at me sitting there alive and well, and for a split second I saw the disappointment in their eyes before they masked it with fake relief. "We thought something happened to you," Paige breathed out, placing a hand over her heart. "We were so worried." "Worried?" I asked, leaning back. "About what?" "About the brakes," Darius blurted out. "I had another nightmare, Dad. I just had to check on you." I smiled, but it did not reach my eyes. "The brakes are fine, son," I said. "Everything is exactly where it is supposed to be." But as I looked at them, I knew the war had just begun, and tonight I was going to find out exactly how far they were willing to go. The pounding on my front door at 2 a.m. was not a knock. It was an assault. It reverberated through the quiet house, shaking the dust off the old family photos in the hallway. I sat in my kitchen chair staring at the door, my coffee mug cold in my hands. I knew who it was. I knew why they were there. They had seen the tracker signal vanish, or worse, they had seen it reappear in a cargo plane over the Atlantic Ocean, and panic had set in. They needed to verify the asset. They needed to make sure the target was still accessible. I stood up slowly, letting my bones creak. I shuffled to the door, adopting the posture of a man woken from a deep sleep. I rubbed my eyes, making them red and watery. I unlocked the deadbolt with a clumsy hand, fumbling with the latch just enough to sell the performance. When I swung the door open, Darius and Paige practically fell inside. The night air rushed in behind them, cold and biting, but it was nothing compared to the chill radiating from my daughter-in-law. Dad, Darius gasped. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown out with adrenaline. He looked like a man who had just run from a crime scene, which in a way he had. "Are you okay?" We were banging for 5 minutes. I blinked at him, confusing clouding my face. "Darius, what time is it? Is the house on fire?" Paige pushed past him, her heels clicking sharply on my hardwood floor. She did not look at my face. Her eyes scanned the room, scanning the hallway, scanning for any sign that I had been packing or fleeing. "We just had a feeling, Dad," she said, her voice pitched high and tight. "A terrible feeling. Darius woke up sweating, saying something was wrong with you. We called and you did not answer. We drove straight over. We thought you might have had a heart attack." A heart attack. The irony was rich. They were hoping for a heart attack. It would have saved them the cost of the hitman. "I am fine," I mumbled, closing the door and shutting out the night. I just turned my phone off. I wanted a good night's sleep. Why is everyone so worried about me all of a sudden? Darius slumped against the wall, wiping sweat from his forehead with the sleeve of his expensive jacket. He looked sick. He looked like a man who was in over his head and knew it. But Paige was different. She was already recovering. She was already calculating. She walked over to me and wrapped her arms around me in a hug that felt more like a shackle. She pressed her body against mine, but there was no warmth in it. It was a performance for Darius and perhaps a test for me. "Oh, Dad," she sighed into my shoulder. "You scared us to death. You really cannot just turn your phone off, not at your age." I stood there stiffly enduring the embrace, but then I felt it. Her hands were on my back, patting me gently. Then they moved lower. She was patting my pockets. She was feeling the sides of my robe. She was not hugging me. She was searching me. She was looking for my phone. She wanted to know why the tracking app she had likely installed on it was not matching the GPS data from the device under my truck. She wanted to know if I had the phone on me or if I had left it somewhere. I pulled away gently, shuffling back toward the kitchen. "I am sorry to worry you," I said, keeping my voice raspy. "I am just an old man trying to get some rest. I do not have much excitement in my life, you know, just this house and my memories." I sat back down at the kitchen table. The house I lived in was a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a neighborhood that was slowly being eaten alive by gentrification. Developers had been knocking on my door for years, offering cash for the land. I always refused. To Darius and Paige, this house was an embarrassment. It was clutter. It was a wasted asset. They saw peeling paint and old furniture. They did not see the memories of my wife, Sarah. They did not know that I owned the mortgage on half the commercial warehouses in the district. They thought this house was all I had. Paige sat down opposite me. Her eyes were sharp, analyzing every micro-expression on my face. "You know, Dad," she started, her voice dropping into that condescending tone people use for children and the elderly. "This scare tonight really made us think. It is dangerous for you to be this isolated. You are disconnected." I sipped my cold coffee. "I like the quiet, Paige, but it is not safe," she insisted, leaning forward. "The world is dangerous. What if you fell? What if someone broke in? We need to be able to find you. You should let us install a family tracking app on your phone. It is very simple. It just lets us know you are safe. It would give Darius so much peace of mind." I looked at Darius. He was staring at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. He knew what she was asking. She wanted digital permission to hunt me. She wanted a backup plan in case the physical tracker failed again. "I do not know about apps," I said, scratching my head. "Sounds complicated. I barely know how to text." "It is easy." "Dad," she pressed a hard edge, entering her voice. "I can set it up for you right now. Where is your phone?" She looked around the kitchen, her eyes landing on the empty counter. "It is in my bedroom," I lied. "Charging. I will look at it tomorrow." "I am too tired to learn new technology tonight." She clenched her jaw. She did not like being told no. She was used to getting her way, used to managing people, used to controlling the narrative, but she could not force me, not without breaking the illusion that she was the caring daughter-in-law. Darius suddenly made a noise, a strangled cough. "I need to use the bathroom," he muttered, pushing himself off the wall. "My stomach is killing me." He hurried down the hall toward the guest bathroom. In his haste, or perhaps in his overwhelming anxiety, he left his phone sitting on the kitchen table right next to the sugar bowl. Paige watched him go, annoyance flashing across her face. She turned back to me, opening her mouth to argue about the app again, but I stood up. "I'm going to heat up some water," I said, moving to the stove. "Do you want tea?" "No, thank you," she said, clipped. I turned my back to her, filling the kettle. I watched her reflection in the dark window above the sink. She was busy checking her nails, looking bored and irritated. She was not looking at the table. I moved quickly. I grabbed a rag from the counter, pretending to wipe a spill, and shuffled toward the table. I swiped across the spill right next to Darius's phone. The screen lit up. A notification. It was a text message. It had arrived just seconds ago. The sender ID was not a name. It was just a symbol. A broom icon. The cleaner. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hand remained steady. I glanced down, reading the preview message on the lock screen. The text was short, brutal, and terrifyingly clear. "Abort tonight. Signal interference. The target is ghosting. You have to lure him out tomorrow. Open space. No cameras." I stared at the words, burning them into my memory. Target. Lure him out. This was confirmation. Absolute, undeniable proof. Darius had not just hired a mechanic to mess with my truck. He had hired a professional, a cleaner, someone who cleaned up messes, someone who made people disappear. And the signal interference they were talking about was my little gift to Canada. They were confused. The tracker was gone, the digital footprint was messy, and the killer could not verify my location. They needed visual confirmation. They needed me out in the open where they could finish the job without relying on technology. I wiped the table again, turning the phone slightly so the screen went dark just as the bathroom door opened and Darius stepped out. He looked paler than before. He walked straight to the table and snatched up his phone, shoving it deep into his pocket. He looked at Paige and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. They were communicating without words. The plan had failed for tonight. They needed to regroup. I turned off the stove. "Well," I said, turning to face them, my face a mask of weary confusion. "Unless there is another emergency, I think I will go back to bed." Paige stood up, smoothing her skirt. She walked over to Darius and whispered something in his ear. He nodded, swallowing hard. He looked at me, and for a second I saw the boy I used to carry on my shoulders. I saw the fear in him. But then he looked at Paige, and the fear turned into resolve. He was terrified of her more than he was terrified of killing his own father. "Wait, Dad," Paige said, her voice suddenly bright and cheery again. "Before we go, we had an idea. Since we are all awake and worried, we realized we have not spent enough quality time together lately. Just family." I gripped the back of the chair. "Here it comes. The lure. What kind of time?" I asked. "Camping," Darius said, his voice cracking slightly. "Remember how we used to go to Lake Blue Ridge when I was a kid? Just you and Mom and me." I remembered. I remembered teaching him to fish. I remembered the smell of pine needles and wood smoke. I remembered Sarah laughing by the fire. "We thought we could go this weekend," Paige said, stepping in. "Just the three of us. A nice quiet weekend at the lake. We can rent a cabin. It is isolated, peaceful, no cell service, just us reconnecting." Lake Blue Ridge. It was 2 hours north. The roads were winding, steep, and dangerous. There were miles of highway with no guardrails, drop-offs that fell hundreds of feet into the forest below. And once you were there, you were miles from the nearest police station. Isolated. No cell service. It was the perfect killing ground. They were inviting me to my own execution. I looked at them. I looked at the son who was willing to trade my life for an insurance payout. I looked at the woman who was pulling his strings. I could have said no. I could have kicked them out, called the police, and shown them the footage. But the police would need more than a text message and a hunch. And if I said no, they would just try again next week. They would come back with poison, or a house fire, or a break-in. No, I needed to end this. I needed to catch them in the act. I smiled. "It was the hardest thing I have ever done." "That sounds wonderful," I said. "I have not been to the lake since your mother passed. I think she would like that." Paige beamed a smile that looked like a shark smelling blood. "Great. We will pick you up Friday morning. Or actually, you should drive your truck up. We have a lot of gear and the BMW is too small. We can convoy." Of course. They needed me in the truck. They needed the accident to happen in my vehicle. "I will drive," I agreed. "I will get the old girl ready." Darius looked relieved. Paige looked triumphant. "Get some rest, Dad," she said. "We will see you soon." They left, closing the door behind them. I locked it. I slid the deadbolt home. Then I went to the window and watched them get into their car. I saw them arguing in the front seat. I saw Paige hit the dashboard in frustration. I turned away from the window. My eyes were dry. I had no tears left for them. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet. I pushed aside my old work shirts and pulled out a heavy metal box from the back shelf. I dialed the combination. Inside lay a stack of files, a burner phone, and a pistol I hadn't touched in 20 years. They wanted to go camping. They wanted to go into the woods where no one could help me. I took the gun out of the box and checked the chamber. "I am going to Lake Blue Ridge," I whispered to the empty house. "But I am not the one who is going to disappear." The smell of industrial detergent and stale coffee hit me the moment I walked into the Suds and Duds laundromat on the west side of Atlanta. It was 8 in the morning on Wednesday, and the place was already humming with the sound of spinning drums and tumbling clothes. I walked past a woman folding sheets who did not even look up. I went straight to the back where a heavy steel door marked "Employees Only" sat under a flickering fluorescent light. I knocked 3 times. A pause. Then 2 more. The lock buzzed and I pushed through. Inside, the air changed instantly. It was cool, quiet, and smelled of old paper and ozone. This was the office of Cyrus Vance. Cyrus was a man who had spent 30 years as a detective in the fraud division before the politics of the department forced him out. Now he ran this place. The laundromat was just to pay the bills. The real work happened here in this windowless room lined with filing cabinets and humming servers. Cyrus was sitting behind a desk that looked like it had survived a war. He was a mountain of a man with skin the color of deep mahogany and a beard that was more salt than pepper these days. He did not smile when he saw me. He just pointed to the metal chair opposite him. "You look like you have seen a ghost, Bernie." He rumbled, his voice deep enough to rattle the pens on his desk. "I feel like one," I admitted, sinking into the chair. "I need you to dig Cyrus. I need you to dig deep." I told him everything. The tracker under the truck, the call from the hitman, the fake concern from Darius and Paige, the trip to Lake Blue Ridge. I laid it all out, sparing no detail, even the parts that made my chest ache with shame. Cyrus listened without interrupting. He just steepled his fingers and watched me with eyes that had seen every kind of evil Atlanta had to offer. When I finished, he turned to his computer. "Give me 10 minutes, he said. I sat there watching the dust motes dance in the light of the computer screens. 10 minutes felt like 10 years. I heard the click of his keyboard, the soft whir of a hard drive spinning up. I watched his face. At first he was impassive. Then his eyebrows drew together. Then he let out a low whistle that sounded like a tire losing air. He spun the monitor around so I could see. "Bernie, you need to look at this," he said softly. The screen was filled with spreadsheets and bank records. It was a digital autopsy of my son's life. I knew Darius was bad with money, but I did not know he was drowning. The numbers were in red, deep red. $200,000 in debt, credit cards maxed out, personal loans from banks that I knew had predatory rates. And then there were the other loans, the ones from names that did not sound like banks, names like Vinny and the Shark. "He is paying Vig on 50 grand just to keep his kneecaps," Cyrus explained, pointing to a series of weekly cash withdrawals. "Your boy is in a hole so deep he cannot see the sky." But that was not the worst of it. Cyrus clicked a new tab. "This is what you really need to see." It was a list of insurance policies. My name was at the top. Bernard Freeman. There were 3 of them. One from a major national carrier, one from a subsidiary, and one from an online broker that specialized in high-risk clients. Date of purchase, 6 months ago. Beneficiary, Darius Freeman. I squinted at the numbers. The first policy was for $1 million. The second was for another $1 million. The third was for $2 million. $4 million. My life had a price tag and my son had set it. But Cyrus was scrolling down to the fine print. He highlighted a paragraph in yellow. "Look at this clause, Bernie. It is standard in high-value policies, but they stacked them. It is called double indemnity." I read the words. "Pays out double the face value in the event of accidental death caused by a motor vehicle collision or public transportation disaster." I did the math in my head. 4 million became 8 million. $8 million. "That is why they need the truck," Cyrus said, his voice grim. "That is why they need the highway. If you die in your sleep from a heart attack, they get 4 million. Which is nice, but it barely covers Darius' debts and sets them up for a few years of luxury. But if you die in a fiery crash on the way to the lake, they get 8 million. That is generational wealth, Bernie. That is private island money." I stared at the screen. I felt sick, physically ill. The tracker. The call about the brakes. The insistence that I drive my old truck to the lake, it was all calibrated to trigger that clause. They did not just want me dead, they wanted me mangled. They wanted me crushed inside 2 tons of steel so they could cash a lottery ticket printed in my blood. And Paige, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Cyrus clicked another window. It showed the payment history for the premiums. They were being paid from a joint account, but the login IP address was always the same. It traced back to a coffee shop in Buckhead, a coffee shop directly across the street from the boutique where Paige worked part-time. She is the one managing the policies, Cyrus confirmed. Darius is the beneficiary on paper, but she holds the leash. She makes the payments. She makes sure the policies do not lapse. I leaned back in the metal chair and closed my eyes. I saw Paige smile. I saw her hand me a plate of food at Thanksgiving. I saw her holding my hand when Sarah died. All of it was a lie. She was investing in a future where I did not exist. So, what do you want to do? Cyrus asked, breaking the silence. We can go to the cops right now. We have enough for conspiracy to commit fraud, maybe even attempted murder if we link the tracker. I shook my head slowly. No, not yet. Why not Bernie? They are going to kill you. Because if I go to the cops now, they will lawyer up, I said, opening my eyes. They will claim the policies were just prudent planning. They will blame the tracker on a misunderstanding or say they were worried about my memory. Darius will cry. Paige will play the victim. They might get a slap on the wrist, but they will walk. And they will still be hungry. Then what? Cyrus asked, crossing his massive arms. I want to catch them, I said. I want them to think they won. I want them to stand over the wreckage thinking they are rich, and then I want to watch their faces when they realize they have nothing. Cyrus looked at me for a long moment. Then a slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. You always were a stubborn son of a gun, Bernie. What do you need? I need a truck, I said. You have a truck. No, I said, standing up. I have a target. I cannot drive my Ford to the lake. It is a death trap. If they tamper with it, I am dead for real. I need a truck that looks like mine. Exactly like mine. But I need it to be able to take a hit. Cyrus tapped his chin. I know a guy. Runs a security transport firm. They armor SUVs for diplomats and rappers. He owes me a favor. Can he make a 2024 armored SUV look like a rusted-out 1998 Ford F-150, I asked. Cyrus laughed. With enough vinyl wrap and rust decals, he can make a tank look like a tricycle. It will cost you, though. I thought about the $20 million in assets sitting in my holding company. I thought about the empire I had built while my son thought I was fixing lawnmowers. Money is not a problem, I said. We spent the next 2 hours planning. Cyrus made the call. His contact was a genius with vehicle modification. We arranged to have a latest model SUV stripped of its luxury exterior panels and wrapped in a custom vinyl skin that mimicked the faded blue paint and rust spots of my old truck perfectly. We would swap the plates. From 10 feet away, it would look like my old beater, but underneath it would have reinforced steel plating, run flat tires, and bulletproof glass. It was a fortress disguised as a ruin. As I left the laundromat, the sun was high in the sky. The city was bustling with life, people going to work, parents taking kids to school. It all seemed so normal, but my world had shifted on its axis. I was no longer a father. I was a general preparing for war. I drove to the rental lot where Cyrus' contact was waiting. I handed over the keys to my real truck. Hide it, I told the mechanic. Somewhere deep. I do not want it seen until Monday. He nodded, handing me the keys to the beast he had prepared. It looked hideous. It looked perfect. The rust decals were art. The dent in the rear bumper was recreated with a 3D printed overlay. I climbed into the driver's seat. The door shut with a heavy, solid thud that sounded like a vault closing. The engine purred with the quiet power of 500 horses. I gripped the leather-wrapped steering wheel. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes looked older but harder. I pulled out my phone and texted Darius. Truck is running great, son. Looking forward to the lake. See you Friday. I put the phone down and put the truck in gear. I was going to Lake Blue Ridge. I was going into the trap. But this time the mouse was bringing a sledgehammer. And when the trap snapped shut, I intended to break the fingers of the person who set it. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of bruised iron. The air was thick and humid, the kind of heavy atmosphere that promises a storm before the day is done. I stood on my porch drinking my last cup of coffee, looking at the beast parked in my driveway. To anyone walking by, it was just my old 1998 Ford F-150, complete with the dent on the rear bumper and the faded blue paint peeling off the hood. But I knew better. I knew that beneath that vinyl skin lay a chassis reinforced with military-grade steel and an engine that could outrun a patrol car. Darius and Paige pulled up in their BMW exactly at 7. They did not get out. Darius just rolled down his window and waved. He looked pale, his eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses, even though the sun had not fully broken through the clouds. Paige was in the passenger seat, typing furiously on her phone. She looked up briefly, flashed a tight smile, and motioned for me to lead the way. "Ready for the lake, Dad," Darius called out, his voice thin over the distance. I nodded and climbed into the driver's seat. The door closed with that solid, reassuring thud that only a $500,000 armored vehicle makes. I started the engine. It purred a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. I pulled out of the driveway and onto the main road. The plan was simple. We would drive 2 hours north into the Blue Ridge Mountains. The route took us off the interstate and onto Highway 60, a winding 2-lane road that snaked through the forest, climbing higher and higher until the trees dropped away into steep ravines. It was a beautiful drive if you were a tourist. It was a deadly drive if you were distracted. For the first hour, the BMW stayed right on my bumper. I watched them in the rearview mirror. I could see them arguing. Paige's hands were moving, chopping the air. Darius was staring straight ahead, gripping the wheel. Then, as we hit the foothills, they started to drop back. At first, it was just a few car lengths, then 100 yards. Then, as we passed the sign that said, "Winding road next 15 miles, they disappeared around a bend behind me. I checked my phone. No signal, just as they promised. I was alone. I tightened my grip on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. I knew this road. I knew what was coming. About 5 miles up the road narrowed. There was a section called Devil's Elbow, a sharp hairpin turn with a sheer drop of 300 feet on the right side. There were no guardrails there, just a few wooden posts that had rotted away years ago. If an accident were to happen, that is where it would be. I checked my mirrors again. Still empty, but the hair on the back of my neck stood up. The silence of the mountain was unnatural. Then I saw it. It was not the BMW. It was a black, heavy-duty pickup truck lifted high on mud tires with a massive steel brush guard on the front. It had no license plates. The windows were tinted so dark they looked like oil slicks. It came out of nowhere, roaring up behind me with a speed that was reckless for these curves. I maintained my speed, doing 55. The speed limit was 45. The black truck didn't slow down. It surged forward, filling my rearview mirror until all I could see was that black steel grille. Then it hit me. Wham! The impact jolted my head back against the headrest. The sound of metal crunching echoed through the cabin. If I had been in my real truck, the rear axle would have snapped. The frame would have buckled. I would have spun out instantly. But the armored SUV barely shuddered. The reinforced frame absorbed the blow like a heavyweight boxer taking a jab. The run-flat tires held their grip on the asphalt. I glanced in the mirror. I could see the confusion in the way the black truck hesitated. The driver had expected me to fold. He had expected the old rust bucket to disintegrate. Instead, he had just hit a brick wall moving at 55 miles per hour. He gunned the engine again. Black smoke poured from his exhaust stacks. He pulled into the oncoming lane, pulling up alongside me. I looked over. The driver was wearing a black ski mask. I couldn't see his face, but I could see his eyes. They were wide-focused and terrified. He swerved hard to the right, slamming the side of his truck into my driver's side door. He was trying to push me off the road. We were approaching Devil's Elbow. The drop-off was coming up fast on my right. If he pushed me now, gravity would do the rest. Grinding metal screamed as we locked together 2 tons of steel wrestling for dominance on a strip of asphalt barely wide enough for one. He pushed harder. I could feel my tires skirting the gravel on the shoulder. Pebbles kicked up, tumbling into the abyss below. Any normal 67-year-old grandfather would have panicked. He would have slammed on the brakes or jerked the wheel, sealing his own fate. But Darius had forgotten who raised him. He forgot that before I owned warehouses, before I wore suits, I drove 18-wheelers across the Rockies in blizzard conditions. He forgot that in my 20s I spent my weekends racing stock cars on dirt tracks where rubbing is racing and the only rule is survival. My heart rate slowed. The world sharpened into crystal clarity. I wasn't an old man anymore. I was a driver. I checked the tachometer. I checked the road ahead. The hairpin turn was 50 yards away. He was leaning into me with everything he had, banking on his weight to shove me over the edge before we hit the curve. I let him think he was winning. I eased off the gas just a fraction, letting my truck drift closer to the edge. The masked driver saw the movement and got greedy. He turned his wheel harder into me committing all his momentum to the push. That was his mistake. 10 yards from the curve, I didn't just brake. I executed a maneuver I hadn't used since 1985. I slammed the heavy-duty brakes and ripped the steering wheel hard to the left into him, just for a split second to break the friction, and then I slammed it hard right, while dropping the transmission into low gear. The armored SUV responded instantly. It decelerated so violently it felt like hitting a wall. The black truck, pushing against a resistance that suddenly wasn't there, lost its balance. His momentum carried him forward and sideways. He shot past my front bumper like a missile. He tried to correct. I saw his front wheels lock up, smoke billowing as he realized he was going too fast for the turn. He missed the edge of the cliff by inches. His rear bumper clipped the wooden post, sending splinters flying into the void. He spun out a full 360 tires, screaming in agony, before slamming rear first into the solid rock face on the opposite side of the road. Crunch. The sound was sickening. His truck folded like an accordion. Steam hissed from the radiator. I brought my vehicle to a stop 10 feet away. My engine idled quietly undamaged. I took a deep breath. My hands were steady. I reached under my seat and pulled out the pistol. I checked the safety. I opened the heavy door and stepped out onto the road. The mountain air smelled of burning rubber and pine. It was silent again except for the hissing of the wrecked truck. I walked over to the black pickup. The driver's side door was jammed shut, the window shattered. Inside, the driver was slumped over the airbag, groaning. I reached through the broken window, unlocked the door, and wrenched it open with a strength fueled by pure adrenaline. "Get out," I growled. The driver tumbled out onto the asphalt, coughing. He clawed at his mask, ripping it off his face to breathe. I looked down at him. It wasn't a professional hitman. It wasn't some faceless cleaner from the dark web. It was Stan. Stan Miller, Darius's college roommate. The guy who used to come over for Thanksgiving when his parents were out of town. The guy I had lent money to start a landscaping business that never got off the ground. Stan looked up at me, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. His eyes widened when he saw the gun in my hand. "Mr. Freeman," he wheezed, holding his ribs. "Oh, God. Mr. Freeman, please." "You tried to kill me, Stan," I said, my voice cold as the mountain wind. "No, no," he cried, scrambling backward on the pavement like a crab. "I wasn't supposed to kill you, I swear." I aimed the pistol at his knee. "Do not lie to me, Stan. You tried to push me off a cliff." "Darius said it was for your own good," Stan blurted out, tears mixing with the blood on his face. "He said you were losing your mind. He said you were a danger to yourself. He told me to just nudge you, just run you off the road into a ditch or a tree, enough to total the truck and get you into the hospital." I stared at him. The lie was so pathetic it was almost funny. "Into the hospital," I repeated. "Stan, you hit me doing 60 on Death Pass. There are no ditches here. There is only a 300-foot drop." "Darius said the truck was old." Stan sobbed. "He said the airbags wouldn't deploy. He said if you got hurt bad, he could get power of attorney. He said he needed to take control of your finances before you gave it all away to some scammer. He promised me 10 grand just to wreck your car." I lowered the gun slightly. So that was the story. Darius had spun a web of lies to everyone. To Stan, he sold the story of the senile father who needed to be saved from himself. To the insurance company, he sold the story of the tragic accident. To me, he sold the story of a camping trip, and Stan, desperate and stupid, had bought it. 10 grand, I said, shaking my head. "You sold my life for 10 grand, Stan." "I didn't know Mr. Freeman. I didn't know he wanted you dead. He just said he needed you incapacitated." Incapacitated. It was a sterile word for broken bones and internal bleeding. I looked down the road. The BMW was nowhere to be seen. They were waiting. They were waiting for the sound of the crash, or maybe they were waiting down at the bottom of the mountain, ready to call 911 with their rehearsed tears. "Get up," I ordered. Stan struggled to his feet, favoring his left leg. "Here is what is going to happen," I said, stepping close to him. "You are going to disappear. You are going to walk down this mountain, find a ride, and leave the state. If I ever see you again, I will not be the one holding the gun. The police will. And I have dashcam footage of you trying to murder me." Stan nodded frantically. "Yes, sir. Yes, sir." I am gone. He limped away toward the woods, not even looking back at his wrecked truck. I watched him go. Then I looked at my own vehicle. The vinyl wrap on the side was shredded, revealing the gleaming steel armor beneath. The illusion was broken. But the game wasn't over. Darius and Paige were still waiting. They expected a corpse. I got back into my truck. I turned it around. I was going home. And I had a surprise for the grieving couple. I parked the armored SUV 3 blocks away in a public lot behind a row of abandoned storefronts. I could not let them see it. If they saw that beast with its scratch-free paint and military tires, they would know I was not the helpless old man they thought I was. I needed to walk the rest of the way. I needed to look tired. I needed to look defeated. I walked down the sidewalk of my own neighborhood, feeling the gravel crunch under my boots. The sky was still dark with storm clouds, but the rain had held off. My house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, looking exactly as I had left it, except for one detail. The front door was unlocked. I could see the jamb was splintered slightly around the deadbolt. They had not even bothered to use a key or wait for me to not return. They had broken in. They had assumed I was dead at the bottom of a ravine, and they had come to claim their inheritance early. I stepped onto the porch and pushed the door open. The living room was warm. The lights were dimmed low, casting long shadows against the walls. Soft jazz was playing from the stereo system I had not turned on in years. Darius and Paige were sitting on my sofa. They had made themselves comfortable. A bottle of my expensive vintage wine, the one I had been saving for a special occasion, was open on the coffee table. 2 crystal glasses sat next to it, half empty. But it was their attire that stopped me cold. They were wearing black. Darius was in a sharp black suit with a black tie. Paige was wearing a modest black dress, the kind you wear to a funeral to look grieving but still fashionable. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore simple pearl earrings. They were dressed for a wake, my wake. I stood in the doorway, letting the draft from outside chill the room. I cleared my throat. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. Paige jumped so hard her hand flew out and struck her wine glass. It tipped over, shattering against the edge of the table and sending a spray of dark red liquid across the beige carpet. It looked like a blood stain spreading fast. Darius choked on his drink, coughing violently as he spun around. His eyes bulged. He looked at me, and for a second he did not see his father. He saw a ghost. He saw a corpse that had climbed out of a wreck and walked home. "Dad," he wheezed, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I locked it. The click of the latch echoed in the silence. I walked slowly into the room, looking from the broken glass to their terrified faces. I kept my expression blank. I kept my hands loose at my sides. "Hello, son," I said, my voice raspy with fatigue. "Hello, Paige." I did not expect a welcoming committee. Paige was staring at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. She looked at my clothes, which were rumpled but intact. She looked at my face, which had no cuts, no bruises, no blood. "You are here," she whispered. "You are alive." I frowned, feigning confusion. "Of course I am alive. Why wouldn't I be?" Darius stood up, his legs shaking so bad he had to lean against the sofa for support. "But the truck," he stammered. "The accident. We thought." I waved a hand, dismissing his panic. "The truck is gone," I said, letting out a heavy sigh. Piece of junk finally gave up the ghost. I was about 5 miles up the mountain road when the engine just seized. Smoke everywhere. Brakes locked up. I barely managed to pull over to the shoulder before it died completely. I walked over to my armchair and sat down, groaning as if my back hurt. Had to wait an hour for a tow truck. I continued weaving the lie with the ease of a man who had negotiated million-dollar contracts. They towed it to a garage in Blue Ridge. The mechanic said the transmission is shot. It is not worth fixing. I looked up at them. So I called an Uber. Cost me $200 to get back here. I am sorry about the camping trip, kids. I really was looking forward to it. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. They were processing. Their brains were trying to rewrite the narrative. They had spent the last 2 hours waiting for a call from Stan confirming the kill. They had dressed in morning clothes. They had broken into my house to start searching for the will. And here I was complaining about a transmission. "That is terrible, Dad," Paige said finally, her voice sounding thin and brittle. "We were so worried. When you did not show up behind us, we thought the worst. I looked at the wine bottle. I looked at the black dresses. Is that right? I asked. You were so worried you decided to have a drink and break my lock. Darius flinched. We did not want to wait outside, he lied quickly. We wanted to be here in case you called. We were just trying to calm our nerves. I pointed a finger at his chest. And the clothes, I asked. Why are you two dressed like undertakers? Paige froze. Her hand went to her pearl necklace, clutching it tightly. Oh, this, she stammered, forcing a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. We have a dinner tonight. A charity gala. Later. We just stopped by on the way to check on you since the camping trip was canceled. A charity gala. On a Friday night when we were supposed to be camping. The lie was sloppy. It was desperate, but I nodded as if I believed it. Well, you look very sharp, I said. Very appropriate. I leaned back and closed my eyes, rubbing my temples. I am exhausted, I said. Being stranded on the side of the road at my age takes it out of you. I need a shower. I feel like I have road dust in my pores. Darius let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 10 minutes. Yeah, Dad, he said, eager to end the conversation. You should shower. Relax. We will clean this up. He gestured to the spilled wine. I stood up slowly. Thank you, son. You are a good boy. I walked past them toward the hallway. I felt their eyes on my back. I felt the hatred radiating from Paige. She had been so close. She had tasted the money. And now I was walking away to take a shower while she cleaned up a stain on a carpet she planned to rip out next week. I went into the bathroom and locked the door. I turned on the shower full blast, letting the steam fill the room. The noise of the water hitting the tiles was loud, a perfect white noise generator. I did not strip. Instead, I sat on the edge of the toilet lid and reached into my pocket. I pulled out a small black case. Inside was a pair of high-fidelity Bluetooth earbuds. I put them in my ears and pressed the power button. A soft beep confirmed the connection. I opened an app on my phone. The screen displayed a waveform audio visualizer. It was receiving a signal from the living room. Years ago when I retired, I had installed a listening system in the main rooms of the house. It was not because I didn't trust my guests. It was because in my line of work, information was currency. Old habits die hard. There were microphones hidden behind the crown molding in the living room, inside the smoke detector in the kitchen, and under the mantel of the fireplace. I adjusted the volume. The sound of the shower faded into the background, replaced by the crystal-clear audio from the living room. I heard the sound of glass being swept up. He is lying, Paige's voice hissed. It was low, venomous, and shaking with rage. I do not know, Paige, Darius, replied, his voice trembling. He seemed fine. Maybe the truck really did break down. Stan does not miss, Paige snapped. Stan said he hit him. Stan said he pushed him off the road. Maybe Stan missed, Darius argued. Maybe the truck broke down before Stan got to him. Maybe Dad is telling the truth. You are an idiot, Paige spat. Your father is not lucky. Nobody is that lucky. The truck dies right before the hit, and he takes an Uber back here while we are sitting here drinking his wine waiting for him to die. It does not add up. I listened, my heart cold. They were not relieved I was alive. They were analyzing the failure. They were debriefing. I heard the sound of pacing, heels clicking on wood, then muffled on carpet. What do we do now? Darius asked. He sounded like a child asking permission to leave the table. Stan is gone. The truck is in a shop somewhere. We missed the window. We make a new window, Paige said. Her voice dropped lower, becoming deadly serious. We cannot wait, Darius. The debts are due on Monday. If we do not pay Vinny, he is going to break your legs, and then he is going to come for me. We need that insurance money now. I gripped my knees. The deadline. Monday. That was why they were so desperate. The sharks were circling. So what, another accident? Darius asked. No, Paige said. Too messy. Too many variables. We tried the car. It failed. We need something he cannot walk away from. Something we control. I held my breath, waiting. We use the medicine, she whispered. What medicine? Darius asked. The heart pills, you idiot, she hissed. The ones he takes every night. The ones in the blue bottle by his bed. Dad does not have a heart condition, Darius said, confused. He takes vitamins. Those are just supplements. He thinks they are supplements, Paige corrected. But tonight they are going to be something else. I have the digoxin in my purse. I got it from my mother's supply. If we swap the pills, he will take them before bed like he always does. Digoxin. In high doses, it causes cardiac arrest. It stops the heart. To a coroner, without a reason to look deeper, it looks exactly like a heart attack in an elderly man. But he will taste it, Darius whined. He won't taste anything, Paige said. I crushed them into powder. We will mix it into a warm drink to help him sleep after his stressful day. Warm milk. Or tea. He loves tea. I stared at the tiled floor of my bathroom. They were going to poison me, tonight, in my own house. I am going to make him some warm milk, Paige said, her voice gaining confidence. I will put honey in it. It will mask the bitterness. I will bring it to him in bed. I will sit there and watch him drink it. I will hold his hand while his heart stops Darius. And then we call 911 and cry about how he passed away peacefully in his sleep. I heard footsteps heading toward the kitchen. Go check on him, Paige ordered. Make sure he is still in the shower. I need 5 minutes. I took the earbuds out and shoved them back into my pocket. I stood up and looked in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were burning. They wanted to play nurse. They wanted to give me a warm drink and watch me die. I turned off the shower. I ruffled my hair with a towel to make it look damp. I splashed water on my face. I opened the bathroom door and stepped into the hallway just as Darius was coming around the corner. He jumped when he saw me. Dad, he said, a nervous smile plastered on his face. Feel better? Much better, I said, patting my stomach. Just needed to wash the day off. I walked past him toward the bedroom. I'm going to turn in, son, I called out over my shoulder. It has been a long day. I went into my room and sat on the edge of the bed. I waited. 5 minutes later, there was a soft knock on the door. Come in, I said. The door opened. Paige stood there holding a steaming mug on a small tray. She had taken off the severe black jacket, revealing her bare arms. She had let her hair down. She looked soft, caring, angelic. Hey, Dad, she said softly, walking into the room. I made you some warm milk with honey and cinnamon. It always helps me sleep when I am stressed. I thought you might need it. She placed the mug on the nightstand next to my reading glasses. The smell of cinnamon wafted up, masking the faint chemical scent of death. That is very sweet of you, Paige, I said, looking at the mug. You are too good to me. Drink it while it is warm, she urged, sitting on the edge of the bed. I will stay with you until you fall asleep. We do not want you to be alone tonight. I reached out and took the mug. It was warm in my hands. I looked at the creamy white liquid. I looked at Paige. She was watching me with eyes that were bright with anticipation. She was waiting for me to take the sip that would end my life. I lifted the mug to my lips. The ceramic mug felt warm in my hands, radiating a heat that should have been comforting, but instead sent a shiver down my spine. Paige sat on the edge of my bed, her posture relaxed, her face a mask of tender concern. She watched me with the intensity of a predator waiting for its prey to weaken. It will help you sleep, she said softly, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. You have had such a traumatic day, Dad. The car trouble, the stress. You need to rest. Steam curled up from the creamy white liquid carrying the scent of cinnamon and honey. It was a smell from my childhood, a smell that meant safety and home. But as I lifted the mug closer beneath the spice and sugar, I caught another scent. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but to a man who had spent 40 years working with industrial chemicals, it was unmistakable. Bitter almonds. It was the scent of cyanide. They had lied about the heart medication. They had decided to double down on lethality. They didn't just want me to die in my sleep. They wanted me dead immediately. They were done taking chances. I looked at Paige over the rim of the mug. Her blue eyes were wide and encouraging. Drink up, she urged, gently patting my knee. I added extra honey just the way you like it. I do not like extra honey. Sarah used to put extra honey in my tea because she had a sweet tooth and projected that onto everyone else. Paige didn't know that. She didn't know me at all. She only knew the caricature of the old man she had created in her head. I lowered the mug slightly, letting out a long, weary sigh. You are right, Paige, I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell the act. I am exhausted. My chest feels tight. Her eyes flickered. Excitement. Anticipation. That is just the stress, she said quickly. The warm milk will relax your muscles. Go on. Drink it all. I brought the mug to my lips again. I tilted it. I let the liquid touch my closed lips, but I did not let a single drop enter my mouth. I feigned a swallow, making a gulping sound in my throat. Paige watched my throat move. She smiled. Is it good, she asked. It is delicious. I lied, lowering the mug. But it is very hot. I need to let it cool for a second. I set the mug down on the nightstand next to the lamp. Actually, I said, rubbing my forehead, could you do me a favor, dear? I left my reading glasses in the kitchen. If I am going to relax, I might read a few pages of my book. Paige hesitated. She didn't want to leave the room. She wanted to verify consumption. I can go get them, she said slowly. But you should drink that before it gets cold and forms a skin. I hate when milk gets that skin on top. I will, I promised. Please. My eyes are so tired. She stood up, smoothing her black dress. She decided a 30-second trip to the kitchen was an acceptable risk. Okay, she said. I will be right back. Do not fall asleep before I return. She turned and walked out of the bedroom. As soon as her shadow left the doorway, I moved. I grabbed the mug. Next to my bed, sitting on a heavy oak stand, was a large potted peace lily, one of the few plants I had managed to keep alive since Sarah died. I am sorry, Sarah, I whispered. I poured the entire contents of the mug into the soil, burying the liquid deep under the dense foliage. The earth drank it up instantly. I placed the empty mug back on the nightstand. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, leaving a small smear of milk foam on my lip as evidence. I sat back against the pillows and closed my eyes, adjusting my breathing to a slow, heavy rhythm. 3 seconds later, Paige walked back in holding my glasses. Here you go, she said. She stopped. She looked at the nightstand. She looked at the empty mug. You drank it fast, she said, a note of surprise in her voice. I nodded, keeping my eyes half closed. I did what you said. I chugged it. You were right. It was getting cold. She walked over and picked up the mug, verifying it was empty. A slow, satisfied smile spread across her face. Good, she whispered. That is very good. She placed my glasses on the table, but she didn't leave. I am going to sit here for a bit, she said, pulling the chair closer, just until you drift off. She wanted to watch the show. I let my head loll to the side. I feel dizzy, I mumbled, slurring my words. That is the milk working, she said soothingly. Just close your eyes, Dad. Let go. I closed my eyes. I focused on my breathing. I waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I decided it was time to give her what she wanted. I let out a low groan. I shifted in the bed, clutching the sheets. Dad, she asked, feigning alarm. Are you okay? My chest, I gasped, opening my eyes wide and staring at the ceiling. It hurts. She stood up, but she didn't help. She backed away toward the door. It is probably just indigestion, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Just try to breathe through it. I arched my back, letting out a strangled cry. The air. I cannot breathe. She watched me for another second, analyzing the symptoms. Convulsions, respiratory failure. It was all part of the script. I will go get Darius, she said. She turned and walked out of the room, closing the door softly. I heard her footsteps retreating down the hall. I heard her whispering urgently. It is starting, she hissed. He is convulsing. I threw off the covers and slid out of bed. I crept to the door and pressed my ear against the wood. Is he dead? Darius asked, his voice shaking. Not yet, Paige replied. But he is in pain. It is working fast. Should we call 911? Darius asked. We have to make it look real. Not yet, you idiot, Paige snapped. If they get here too soon, they might pump his stomach. We have to wait. We need to be sure his heart has stopped. How long? Darius asked. 20 minutes, she said. We wait 20 minutes. Then we go and check for a pulse, and if there isn't one, we call 911 in a panic. We tell them he died peacefully in his sleep. 20 minutes. They were giving me a 20-minute head start. I stepped back from the door. My heart was pounding, not from poison, but from pure adrenaline. They were standing right there, just down the hall, waiting for their father to die. I looked around the room. I needed to leave. Now. I went to the window. My bedroom was on the ground floor facing the backyard. I unlocked the latch and slid the sash up. It moved silently. The night air hit my face, cool and damp. The storm had finally broken and a light rain was falling. I grabbed the small waterproof bag I had stashed under the bed. It contained my cash, my new ID, and the keys to the rental car I had parked 3 blocks over. I put one leg over the sill. But before I left, I stopped. I looked back at the empty bed. I looked at the rumpled sheets where I was supposed to be dying. I looked at the peace lily, which was already starting to droop, its leaves turning brown from the toxic dose. They would come in here in 20 minutes. They would expect to find a corpse. Instead, they would find nothing. I wanted them to know. I wanted them to know that I knew. I walked over to the nightstand. I took a piece of paper from the notepad I kept there. I took a pen. I wrote a single sentence. He is perfectly healthy. No heart condition. It was what the doctor had told me days ago. It was the truth they had tried to bury with lies. I placed the note on the pillow right where my head had been. Then I climbed out the window and lowered myself into the wet grass. I slid the window down but left it open just an inch so the curtains would blow in the wind like a ghost. I ran. I ran through the backyard, dodging the old swing set I had built for Darius when he was 5. I ran through the neighbor's hedge. I ran until I hit the street behind my house. I made it to the rental car, a gray sedan parked inconspicuously between 2 trucks. I unlocked it and slid inside. I started the engine and let it idle, the sound drowned out by the rain. I checked my watch. 15 minutes had passed. In 5 minutes, Darius and Paige would open that door. They would put on their sad faces, ready to perform for the paramedics. They would walk to the bed expecting to see the final obstacle to their fortune removed. And instead, they would find a ghost. I put the car in gear and pulled away, driving slowly through the rain-slicked streets. I was not Bernie Freeman, the victim, anymore. I was Bernie Freeman, the man who had just risen from the dead. They wanted my money. They wanted my legacy. They were going to get exactly what they deserved. The rain had stopped by the time I reached the city limits, but the storm inside me was just beginning to rage. I drove the rental sedan past the towering glass skyscrapers of downtown Atlanta, feeling a strange sense of dislocation. For the past 10 years, I had played the role of the retired mechanic so well that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to be the other Bernie Freeman. The Bernie Freeman who did not worry about the price of gas. The Bernie Freeman who could buy and sell everyone who had ever looked down on him. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the Freeman Logistics Tower. The security guard, a young man named Marcus, who I had hired personally 3 years ago, stepped out of his booth with a frown. He saw a generic gray sedan and a disheveled old man behind the wheel. He started to wave me away, probably thinking I was a lost delivery driver. Then I rolled down the window and looked him in the eye. "Good morning, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping, the raspy act I used with my family. He froze. He squinted at me, peering past the stubble on my chin and the cheap windbreaker I was wearing. Then his eyes went wide. He snapped to attention, his back straightening as if he had been electrified. "Mr. Freeman," he stammered. "Sir, we did not expect you. The board said you were on sabbatical." "I am back, Marcus," I said. "Open the gate, and do not tell a soul I am here. Not the front desk, not the VP. No one." "Yes, sir." "Of course, sir." The gate lifted. I drove through parking in the reserved spot that had sat empty for half a decade. I took the private elevator up to the penthouse floor. The doors slid open, revealing a world that Darius and Paige could not even imagine in their wildest greed-induced dreams. My office was exactly as I had left it. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city I helped build. The furniture was Italian leather and mahogany. On the walls hung framed accolades and photos of the massive container ships and freight trains that moved goods under my company banner. I walked to the window and looked down at the streets below. From up here, the people looked like ants. My son and his wife were down there somewhere, scurrying around in the dirt thinking they were predators. They did not realize they were just insects and I was the boot. I sat down in my executive chair. It felt good. It felt right. For too long I had stooped my shoulders and lowered my head. Most people knew Freeman Logistics as a faceless corporate giant. They knew the trucks on the highway. They knew the massive warehouses near the airport and the shipping yards in Savannah. What they did not know, because I had spent a fortune keeping it quiet, was that I still owned 40% of the company. I was the silent majority shareholder. My net worth was not measured in the thousands or even the hundreds of thousands. It was north of $20 million. I had kept it a secret for one reason: Darius. When Sarah died, I saw how money affected people. I saw friends turn into leeches. I saw family members appear out of the woodwork with their hands out. I did not want that for my son. I wanted him to build his own character. I wanted him to know the value of a dollar earned with sweat, not given with a signature. So I created the illusion of the poor retired father. I thought if he believed I had nothing, he would learn to make something of himself. I was wrong. Instead of learning to work, he learned to steal. Instead of building his own ladder, he decided to cut down the tree. The elevator chimed softly. The doors opened and a woman stepped out. She was tall, impeccable, and carried herself with the sharpness of a razor blade. Ms. Sterling, my personal attorney, and the only person on earth besides Cyrus who knew the full extent of my double life. She did not look surprised to see me. She just looked at my cheap clothes with a raised eyebrow and set a thick leather folder on my desk. "You look terrible, Bernie," she said, sitting down and crossing her legs. "But I assume being poisoned and pushed off a cliff will do that to a man." "You heard I asked." "Cyrus updated me," she said. "He sent over the audio files. I have already forwarded them to a private server. Your family is very busy, Bernie." "How busy?" She opened the folder. She pulled out a document that made the air leaving my lungs feel hot. It was a property deed, my property deed. The deed to the modest ranch house where I had raised my son, where I had loved my wife, and where I had almost died last night. But there was a stamp on it. A lien. "Darius didn't just want your insurance money," she said. Her voice clipped and professional. "He needed cash immediately. Yesterday morning, while you were dealing with the tracker, he met with a man named Russo. Russo is not a banker. Russo is the kind of man who lends money at 50% interest and collects with a baseball bat." I picked up the document. I stared at the signature at the bottom. Bernard Freeman. It was my name. It looked like my handwriting. But the loops were too wide, the pressure too heavy. It was a forgery, a clumsy, desperate forgery. "He forged my signature," I whispered. "He mortgaged your house for $500,000 sterling confirmed. Short-term loan. Due in full in 48 hours. That means tomorrow at noon. If the money isn't paid, Russo takes the house. And if he finds out the collateral is worthless because the signature is fake, he doesn't take the house. He takes Darius." I leaned back, the leather creaking. "That is why they were so desperate," I said. "That is why they couldn't wait for the heart attack to look natural. They were on a deadline. The sharks were circling." "Exactly," Sterling said. "They needed you dead by this morning so they could show the death certificate to Russo and promise him the insurance payout. Without your death, they have nothing but a debt they cannot pay and a criminal who is losing patience." I looked at the forged signature again. I felt a strange detachment. The anger was there, burning hot and bright, but the sadness was gone. You cannot grieve for someone who never existed. The son I thought I had was a fiction. The man who signed this paper was a stranger. "So what happens now?" Sterling asked. "Do we call the police?" "We have fraud, forgery, attempted murder. I can have them in cuffs within the hour." I stood up and walked back to the window. I looked at the city. I thought about the police. It would be easy. It would be clean. But it would be private. They would be arrested quietly. They would make up stories. They would play the victim. They would say I was abusive or senile or that I had told them to sign it. No. I wanted them to own this. I wanted them to stand in the light and show the world what they were. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Cyrus. He was watching my house. "They are tearing it apart, Bernie. They are looking for the will. They just smashed Sarah S. China cabinet. They are screaming at each other. It is ugly." I felt a spike of rage so intense my vision blurred. Sarah S. cabinet. The one thing she loved more than anything in that house. They were destroying her memory because they couldn't find my money. That was it. The final line. I turned back to Sterling. My face felt like it was carved from stone. "No police," I said. "Not yet." Then what she asked, closing the folder. "I am going to throw a party," I said. "A party," she repeated, blinking. "Yes. A dinner party. Tonight. I want you to book the private room at the View, the one with the glass walls." The View was the most expensive restaurant in Atlanta. It sat atop a skyscraper overlooking the entire city. It was a place where deals were made and empires were celebrated. It was a place Darius had always dreamed of going but could never afford. "I want you to call Darius," I instructed. "Tell him you are my attorney. Do not tell him about the company. Just tell him I came to you today to finalize my estate. Tell him I have decided to sign over my assets before I go on a long trip. Tell him I want to do it tonight over dinner to celebrate his future." Sterling smiled. It was a shark smile, sharp and dangerous. "You want to bait them. I want to feed them," I corrected. "They are hungry for my money. They are desperate. If they think I am handing over the keys to the kingdom, they will walk right into the lion's den. And invite Paige's parents," I added. "The Kings. They have always looked down on me. They think their daughter married beneath her. I want them there to see their golden girl shine. Sterling stood up, smoothing her suit. I will make the calls. What are you going to do? I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked at the old man in the cheap windbreaker. I am going to get dressed, I said. I walked into the adjoining room which served as my private quarters at the office. I opened the wardrobe. Inside hung rows of bespoke suits, Italian silk ties and shirts that cost more than Darius' car payments. I stripped off the disguise. I took off the stained pants, the worn-out shirt, the scuffed boots. I showered, scrubbing the smell of fear and rain off my skin. I put on a charcoal gray suit cut to fit me perfectly. I fastened a platinum watch to my wrist. I slid my feet into polished leather shoes. I looked in the mirror. Bernie the mechanic was gone. Mr. Freeman, the CEO, was back. They wanted my legacy. They wanted the Freeman Empire. Tonight I was going to give it to them, but they were going to choke on it. Ms. Sterling handed me the phone and nodded once. Her face was impassive, but her eyes held a glimmer of anticipation. I took the device and dialed my son's number. I watched the city lights flickering below through the panoramic window of my office. I was 70 floors up. From here, the problems on the ground looked small, manageable. Darius answered on the first ring. His voice was a mixture of panic and exhaustion. "Dad, where are you? We have been looking everywhere. The house is empty. Your car is gone. We were about to call the police." He was lying, of course. He was not looking for me to save me. He was looking for me to bury me. He was terrified that I had escaped the poison and vanished with the secrets of the family bank account. "I am fine, son," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. I needed some air. I needed to think about what Darius asked, breathless. About the future, I said. About what you and Paige said. About the house being too big. About me being old. You were right, Darius. I have been holding on too tight. I have been selfish. There was a silence on the other end. A stunned silence. Then a cautious, hopeful voice broke through. "What do you mean, Dad?" "I mean, I am tired of fighting." I lied, smoothly. "I am ready to let go. I am at the View restaurant downtown. I have booked the private glass room. I want you and Paige to come down here right now." The View. Darius stammered. "That place is impossible to get into. How did you afford it?" "I dipped into my savings," I said. "I wanted to do this right. I have the papers here, Darius. I am going to sign over the house to you. I am going to sign over power of attorney. I am going to give you everything you asked for. I am going on a long trip, and I want to leave with a clean slate." I could hear him breathing. I could hear the gears turning in his head. He was not questioning the logic. He was not asking how a poor mechanic got a reservation at the city's most exclusive dining establishment. He was only hearing one thing: victory. He thought he had won. He thought the poison scare or the car accident had finally broken my spirit. "Really, Dad?" he asked, his voice trembling with greed. "You mean it?" "I mean it," I said. "Bring Paige. And bring her parents too. The Kings. I know they have always worried about Paige's future. I want them to be there to see that she is taken care of. I want to make peace with everyone tonight." "Okay, Dad." "Okay, we are coming. We will be there in 30 minutes. Do not move. Just wait for us." He hung up. I handed the phone back to Sterling. He took the bait she asked. "Hook, line, and sinker," I replied, straightening my silk tie. On the other side of town, I knew exactly what was happening. The panic in Darius' house was evaporating, replaced by a euphoric rush of adrenaline. They were celebrating. They thought the old man had finally cracked. They thought the pressure, the gaslighting, the attempted murder had finally paid off. They were about to inherit a house worth $500,000 and whatever meager savings they thought I had. But it was Paige who would escalate this. I knew her. She would not just be happy, she would be triumphant. She would call her parents Robert and Cynthia King immediately. The Kings were old money, or at least they pretended to be. They lived in a gated community, drove leased Jaguars, and looked down on anyone whose collar was blue. They had despised me from the moment Darius introduced us. To them, I was just a grease monkey with dirt under his fingernails. They tolerated Darius only because they thought he had potential, but they hated his background. Now Paige could call them and say, "We won." She could tell them that the stubborn old man was capitulating. She could invite them to witness the transfer of wealth. It was the ultimate ego stroke. I imagined them getting dressed. Darius pulling on his best suit, trying to hide the sweat stains from his earlier panic. Paige applying fresh lipstick, her eyes bright with the prospect of money. The Kings driving in from the suburbs, their noses high in the air, ready to accept my surrender with gracious condescension. They were walking into the lioness den thinking it was a petting zoo. I waited in the private dining room of the View. The room was spectacular. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a 360-degree view of the Atlanta skyline. The table was set with crystal and silver. A magnum of champagne sat in an ice bucket. I stood with my back to the door, looking out at the city I helped build. I checked my reflection in the glass. The charcoal suit fit perfectly. The platinum watch caught the light. I did not look like Bernie the mechanic. I looked like a shark in human skin. I heard voices in the hallway, loud, confident voices. "This is incredible," Robert King was saying. I did not know the old man had it in him to pick a place like this. Probably spent his entire life savings on one dinner, Cynthia King sneered. Pathetic, really. Trying to impress us at the very end. "Well, at least he is finally doing the right thing," Page's voice cut in sharp and clear. "It is about time he stopped being a burden and started contributing. That house is a teardown anyway, but the land is worth a fortune." Darius laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "We are going to be set. Once I sign those papers, the loan sharks back off and we have liquid cash." They entered the room. I did not turn around immediately. I let them soak it in. I let them see the opulence. I let them see the champagne. Bernie Robert King boomed, his voice echoing in the glass chamber. "Well, well, well. Look at this. Finally decided to join the civilized world, did you?" I turned slowly. The silence that fell over the room was instant and absolute. They were staring at me. But they were not staring at my face. They were staring at the suit. They were staring at the shoes. They were staring at the way I stood, tall, powerful, and completely at ease. I was not the hunched-over mechanic in a stained jumpsuit. I was a man who owned the room. Darius's mouth hung open. Paige blinked rapidly, trying to process the visual data that contradicted everything she knew about me. "Dad," Darius whispered, "you look different." "I look like myself, son," I said, my voice deep and resonant. "Please sit down." I gestured to the table. They sat slowly, moving like puppets on strings. Robert and Cynthia King looked confused, but they masked it with arrogance. Paige sat next to Darius, her eyes darting around the room, looking for the papers, looking for the notary, looking for the prize. So Robert King said, settling into his chair and reaching for the champagne bottle without asking, "We hear you are finally making some sensible decisions, Bernie. Paige tells us you are moving to a facility. Smart move. Let the young people handle the assets. You have had your turn." Cynthia chimed in, smoothing her expensive dress. "Yes, Bernie, it is so noble of you to step aside. Darius and Paige have such big plans. They deserve to enjoy their lives without having to worry about supporting you." Paige smiled a tight, predatory smile. "We just want you to be safe, Dad. We want you to be comfortable. Signing the house over is the best way to protect your legacy." My legacy. They dared to speak of my legacy. I looked at them one by one. I looked at the greedy parents who had raised a monster. I looked at the son who had tried to kill me for a payout. I looked at the daughter-in-law who had mixed poison into my milk. "You are right," I said, picking up my glass of sparkling water. "It is time for the truth. It is time for everyone to get exactly what they deserve." Darius leaned forward, his eyes hungry. "The papers, Dad. Where are the papers?" I reached into my inside jacket pocket. I pulled out a single folded document. It was not a thick stack of deeds and transfer forms. It was a single sheet of crisp white paper. I placed it on the spinning glass centerpiece in the middle of the table. I gave it a gentle push. It rotated slowly until it stopped in front of Darius. "What is this?" he asked, reaching for it. "Read it," I said. Darius picked up the paper. Paige leaned over his shoulder, reading along. As their eyes scanned the text, the color drained from their faces. Paige let out a small, strangled gasp. Darius dropped the paper as if it burned his fingers. "You sold it," he whispered, horror choking his voice. "What?" Robert King demanded, snatching the paper. "What does it say?" "It says," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade, "that as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, the property located at 452 Oak Street, formerly owned by Bernard Freeman, has been sold to a private holding company. The transaction is complete. The funds have been transferred." "Sold!" Darius screamed, standing up so fast his chair fell over backward. "You sold the house. You cannot sell the house." "Why not?" I asked, taking a sip of water. It is my house. Because I... Darius started, then stopped, his eyes darting to Paige. Because we need it, Paige yelled, losing her composure entirely. We need that money. You promised. You said you were signing it over to us. I lied, I said simply. Just like you lied about the breaks. Just like you lied about the camping trip. Just like you lied about the heart medicine. Cynthia King looked appalled. This is outrageous. You bring us here to tell us you sold your hovel. Where is the money, Bernie? You owe that money to your son. It is his inheritance. The money, I said, standing up and buttoning my jacket, is gone. I donated the proceeds to a charity for victims of elder abuse. Every single cent. You are lying, Darius shouted, his face turning red. You cannot do this. We have plans. We have debts. I know about your debts, Darius, I said, walking around the table until I stood right behind him. I know about the $200,000. I know about the loan sharks. And I know about the mortgage fraud. The room went deadly silent. Mortgage fraud. Robert King asked, looking at Darius. What is he talking about? I leaned down close to my son's ear. I know you forged my signature to take out a loan against the house, I whispered. $500,000 due tomorrow at noon. But here is the problem, son. You cannot mortgage a house you do not own. And now that I have sold it, your forgery is going to be exposed the moment the title company runs the search. Darius began to shake. He looked at Paige. She was staring at me with pure hatred, but beneath the hate, there was terror. The loan sharks are not going to get paid. I continued, my voice calm and cold. And when they find out you gave them a worthless deed, they are going to come for you. And since you are not in prison yet, they will find you very easily. Prison Page snapped. What are you talking about, old man? Nobody is going to prison. You are just a senile old fool who sold his house. We will contest the sale. We will have you declared incompetent. I laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. Incompetent, I asked. You think an incompetent man could orchestrate this? You think a senile old man could buy this suit? I gestured to the room. I did not just sell the house, Paige. I own the building we are standing in. Paige froze. What? I own the view. I said, I own the tower. I own Freeman Logistics. I am worth $20 million. And I have been watching you try to kill me for a fortune that is crumbs compared to what I actually have. The shock on their faces was better than any paycheck I had ever earned. The Kings looked like they were having strokes. Paige looked like she had been slapped. Darius looked like he was going to vomit. You are rich, Darius whispered. I was rich, I corrected. Now I am just a man who is disappointed in his investment. I walked to the door. Enjoy the dinner, I said without looking back. I paid for it. It is the last thing I will ever buy for you. And Darius, when the police arrive, try not to cry. It embarrasses the family. You sold the house. Darius screamed. His voice cracked and shattered like the crystal glass he had knocked over moments before. He gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. His eyes were wide and erratic, darting around the room as if searching for an exit that did not exist. You cannot sell the house, Dad. You do not understand. That house, that deed, I already. He stopped himself. The confession died in his throat, choking him. He realized too late that he was standing in a room full of witnesses, including the wealthy in-laws he had spent years trying to impress. Robert King slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. What is going on here, Bernie? Why is your son acting like a lunatic? You invite us to a 5-star dinner to announce you sold a tear-down shack in the ghetto. This is a waste of my time. It is not a waste of time, Robert, I said, calmly taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. It is an education. I looked at Darius. He was hyperventilating. He was doing the math in his head. $500,000 due tomorrow at noon. Collateral that no longer belonged to him. A forged signature that was about to be flagged by every title company in the state. You mortgage it, didn't you, son? I asked, my voice low and dangerous. Darius looked at me, tears streaming down his face. Not tears of sorrow, but tears of pure terror. I had to, he whispered. They were going to kill me, Dad. Who is going to kill you? Cynthia King asked, clutching her pearls. What is he talking about, Paige? Paige was sitting frozen in her chair. She was looking at me with a mixture of hatred and calculation. She was trying to find a new angle, a new lie, but the walls were closing in too fast. I reached into my leather briefcase, which I had placed by my feet. I pulled out a thick manila envelope. It hit the spinning glass centerpiece of the table with a heavy thud. "You want to know who he is dealing with, Cynthia?" I asked, giving the glass a push. "Look at the pictures." The envelope spun until it reached Paige as parents. Robert King opened it with trembling hands. He pulled out the first photograph. It was a grainy surveillance shot taken with a telephoto lens. It showed Darius standing in a dark alley behind a strip club shaking hands with a man who looked like a refrigerator with a neck tattoo. "That is Russo," I explained. "He is a loan shark. He lends money to desperate people who cannot get bank loans, and when they do not pay, he does not send a collections letter. He sends a man with a hammer." Cynthia gasped, dropping the photo. Robert pulled out the next one. This one was of Paige. She was sitting in her Mercedes in a pharmacy parking lot exchanging a stack of cash for a small brown vial. "And that is your daughter," I said, pointing at Paige, "buying digoxin and cyanide from a disgraced pharmacist who sells under the table. That was the secret ingredient in my warm milk last night." "Liar," Paige shrieked, jumping up. "That is a lie. That could be anything." "And this," I said, pointing to the third photo Robert was holding. "This is the GPS tracker Darius put under my truck, the one I mailed to Canada, the one that was supposed to help a hitman run me off the road." The room was deadly silent. The waiter who had been approaching with appetizers saw the tension and backed away, disappearing into the kitchen. "You see," I continued, my voice hard as steel, "your children are not just greedy. They are criminals. They tried to stage a car accident. When that failed, they tried to poison me. And when they thought I was dead, they broke into my house to find the deed so they could hand it over to a loan shark." Darius was shaking his head violently back and forth. No, it wasn't supposed to be like this. We just needed the money." "You forged my signature, Darius," I said, standing up and leaning over the table. "You signed my name on a mortgage document. But here's the reality check. I sold the house this afternoon to a holding company I own. The title transfer was instant. When Russo tries to collect on that deed tomorrow, the clerk is going to tell him it is invalid. The forgery will be exposed." I checked my watch. "And Russo is not a patient man. He knows you are here. My sources tell me his men are waiting in the parking garage right now. They know the deal went sour. They are not waiting until noon tomorrow." Darius let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He looked at the window as if thinking about jumping. We were 70 stories up. "They are here," he wheezed. "Oh God, they are going to break my legs. They are going to do worse than that," I said. "Unless you go to prison. Prison is the only place Russo cannot reach you tonight." "Prison," Paige hissed. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure ugliness. "We are not going to prison, you old fool. You are going to fix this. You have money, right? You own this building. Write a check. Pay them off." I laughed. "Pay them off," I repeated. "You try to kill me and you think I am going to pay your debts." "Yes, you are," Paige screamed, grabbing a steak knife from the table. She pointed it at me, her hand shaking. "Because we are family. Because you owe us." Robert King stood up, his face purple. "Put the knife down, Paige. This has gone too far. We are leaving." He grabbed Cynthia's arm and tried to move toward the door. "Sit down," Darius roared. He reached into his waistband. He pulled out a black metal object. It was a gun. A snub-nosed revolver, cheap and dirty, the kind you buy out of a trunk in a bad neighborhood. He pointed it at me. Then he swung it toward the Kings. Then back to me. "Nobody is leaving," he screamed. "Nobody leaves until I get my money." Darius put the gun down. I said, my voice calm, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "You are digging a hole you cannot climb out of." "I am already in the hole," he yelled, saliva flying from his mouth. "I am dead anyway, Dad. If I walk out that door, Russo kills me. If I get arrested, my life is over. I have nothing to lose." He kicked the chair away and backed up to the door. He reached behind him and turned the lock. The heavy click echoed in the silent room. "Write the check," he ordered, aiming the gun at my chest. "Write a check for $500,000. Right now. Or I swear to God I will kill everyone in this room." Paige looked at her husband. For the first time, she looked terrified of him. She had created a monster, and now the monster had a gun. "Darius, honey," she said, her voice trembling. "Let's just think about this." "Shut up," Paige, Darius snapped. "This is your fault. You said he was weak. You said he was senile. You said it would be easy. Look at him. Does he look senile to you? He gestured at me with the gun. I stood tall, my hands at my sides. I looked at my son. I looked past the gun, past the fear, past the greed. Why, Darius? I asked softly. Why did you do it? I gave you a home. I gave you an education. I loved you. Why did you want me dead? Because you held out on me, he screamed, tears streaming down his face. You had all this money. You owned skyscrapers, Dad. And you made me drive a used Honda. You made me beg for rent money. You watched me struggle while you sat on a mountain of gold. I wanted you to learn, I said. I wanted you to be strong. I did not want to be strong, he cried. I wanted to be rich. I wanted to be respected. Do you know how they look at me? Page's friends, the Kings. They look at me like I am trash, like I am the son of a mechanic. I needed the money to be someone. I looked at the Kings. They were cowering in the corner, holding each other. They were pathetic. You wanted to impress them, I asked, pointing at the shivering couple. These people who judge a man by his wallet and not his character. You sold your soul for their approval. It does not matter, Darius said, wiping his nose with his sleeve. Just write the check. Write it and we disappear. We will go to Mexico. You will never see us again. I shook my head slowly. I cannot do that, son. Why not? He screamed, cocking the hammer of the gun. Because it is too late, I said. And because you are a fool. I took a step toward him. He flinched, but he did not shoot. You think I was holding out on you, I asked. You think I was being stingy, Darius. I have a trust document in my safe right now. It was drafted 5 years ago. I took another step. It transfers ownership of Freeman Logistics to you, I said. Not a check. The company, the real estate, the assets, $20 million worth of empire. Darius lowered the gun slightly, his eyes widening. What, he whispered. It was set to execute on your 35th birthday, I said. I wanted to give you time to mature. I wanted to hand you the keys when you were ready to drive. 20 million, Paige breathed out. Her eyes glazed over. She looked like she was in a trance. You were going to give me $20 million, Darius asked, his voice breaking. Yes, I said. But you couldn't wait 3 years. You couldn't work for it. You chose the quick way. You chose the insurance scam. You chose the $4 million payout over the $20 million legacy. You traded a kingdom for a used car lot, Darius. The realization hit him like a physical blow. His knees buckled. The gun dipped toward the floor. 20 million, he sobbed. I would have had 20 million. Paige suddenly let out a shriek. It was the sound of a wild animal. You idiot, she screamed, launching herself at Darius. You told me he was broke. You told me he had nothing but the house and the pension. She clawed at his face, her nails digging into his skin. You ruined it, she yelled. We could have had it all. We could have waited. You stupid, useless man. Get off me, Darius yelled, trying to push her away. The gun waved wildly in the air. Paige grabbed his wrist. She wasn't trying to disarm him to save us. She was trying to hurt him. She was blinded by the loss of the fortune she felt she was owed. Give me the gun, she screamed. You can't even hold a gun right. I will do it. I will make him write the check. They wrestled for the weapon. The Kings screamed. I dove under the table. There was a flash of light, a deafening boom. The glass wall behind them shattered, raining shards down onto the streets of Atlanta. And then silence. I looked up from under the table. Paige was standing there, looking down at her leg. A dark stain was spreading rapidly across her black dress just above the knee. She looked surprised. Then she looked at Darius. Then she opened her mouth and screamed. Darius dropped the gun. It clattered on the floor, sliding across the marble tiles until it hit my shoe. He looked at his hands. He looked at his wife bleeding on the floor. He looked at me. Dad, he whispered, help me. I picked up the gun. It was heavy. It was warm. I stood up and pointed it at the floor. I took out my phone and dialed a number. It is over, Cyrus, I said. Send them in. The door to the private room burst open. But it wasn't the police. Not yet. It was Cyrus leading a team of 4 private security contractors. They were big, serious men wearing tactical vests. They swarmed the room. 2 of them grabbed Darius, slamming him against the wall and zip-tying his hands. One of them went to Paige, applying a tourniquet to her leg while she screamed curses at everyone. The Kings were weeping in the corner, terrified and humiliated. I handed the gun to Cyrus. Bag it, I said. Evidence. I walked over to Darius. He was pinned against the expensive wallpaper, his face pressed into the pattern. He was crying like a child. "Dad, please," he begged. "Do not let them take me. Russo will kill me in prison." I looked at him. I looked at the son I had raised, and I realized that the boy I knew had died a long time ago. The man in front of me was a stranger who had tried to kill me. "You made your choice, Darius," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You bet against the house, and the house always wins." I turned to Ms. Sterling, who had been watching from the corner, calm as a statue throughout the entire ordeal. "Draft the paperwork," I told her. "What paperwork?" she asked. "The disownment papers," I said, "and the donation forms. I want every cent of that trust fund liquidated and sent to charity. Tonight." I walked out of the room, leaving the screams and the sirens behind me. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I walked out into the cool night air. The parking valet brought my car around. Not the rental, not the rusty truck, my real car. A vintage restored Mercedes convertible that I kept in storage for special occasions. I got in and put the top down. I looked up at the tower. I could see the lights of the private room 70 floors up. I could see the flashing lights of the police cars arriving at the entrance. I put the car in gear and drove away. I was alone. I had no son. I had no family. But I was alive, and for the first time in a long time, I was free. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed glass room. It was not the cinematic bang I had expected, but a flat, hard crack that slapped against the eardrums and left a high-pitched ringing in its wake. Time seemed to fracture and slow down. I watched the smoke drift lazily from the barrel of the cheap revolver as it clattered across the marble floor, spinning like a discarded toy. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Then Paige screamed. It was a sound that tore through the luxury suite, a raw, primal shriek of disbelief and agony. She staggered back, clutching her thigh. Dark red blood began to bloom against the black fabric of her dress, spreading rapidly like ink on blotting paper. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the expensive carpet, writhing and clawing at the floor. Darius stood frozen, his hands hovering in the air where the gun had been moments before. His face was a mask of absolute shock. He looked at his hands, then at his wife, then at me. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He had not meant to pull the trigger. In his greed and his desperation to control the situation, he had destroyed the only ally he had left. Robert and Cynthia King were huddled in the corner behind an overturned chair. Cynthia was sobbing quietly, her hands over her ears, rocking back and forth. Robert was staring at his daughter bleeding on the floor, his face the color of ash. The arrogance, the condescension, the pride, it had all evaporated, leaving behind two terrified old people who realized too late that they were not spectators in this tragedy, but participants. Before Darius could move, before he could kneel to help his wife or lunge for the gun again, the double doors of the private dining room exploded inward. This was not hotel security. This was the result of the call Cyrus had made 10 minutes ago. "Police, get down. Get on the ground now." A tactical team swarmed the room, moving with a terrifying fluid efficiency. They were dressed in heavy armor, their weapons drawn and leveled. Laser sights cut through the dim ambient lighting, painting dancing red dots on Darius' chest and forehead. Darius did not resist. The fight had left him the moment the gun went off. He crumpled to his knees, his hands raised in surrender, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot and sweat of a man whose soul had finally broken under the weight of his own choices. "Do not move," one officer shouted, advancing on him. Two officers were on him instantly. They drove his face into the carpet right next to the wine stain from earlier that evening. They twisted his arms behind his back with practiced brutality. I heard the metallic ratcheting sound of handcuffs tightening. It was a final, definitive sound. It signaled the end of Darius Freeman, the aspiring mogul, and the beginning of inmate Freeman. Paramedics rushed in behind the tactical team, pushing past the officers to get to Paige. As they cut away the expensive fabric of her dress to pack the wound, the room filled with the smell of rubbing alcohol and copper blood. Paige was hyperventilating, her face slick with shock. But as the pain meds began to be administered, her survival instinct kicked in. It was a vicious, ugly thing to witness. She did not ask about her husband. She did not ask if Darius was okay. She pointed a trembling finger at the man lying handcuffed on the floor just a few feet away. "He did it," she shrieked, her voice shrill and hysterical, cutting through the radio chatter. "He shot me. He tried to kill me." Darius lifted his head from the carpet dirt smudged on his cheek. "Paige, what are you saying?" "He is crazy," she yelled, looking frantically at the police officers. "He forced me to come here. He bought the gun. I told him to stop. I told him I wanted no part of this. He threatened to kill me if I did not help him scam his father." It was a lie so bold and so desperate that it took my breath away. Paige had been the architect. She was the one who bought the poison. She was the one who tracked the insurance policies. She was the one who pushed him every step of the way, mocking his hesitation, feeding his greed. But now, faced with the reality of prison, she was throwing him to the wolves without a second thought. "I have proof," she babbled as the paramedics lifted her onto a stretcher. "Check his phone. He has the contacts for the loan sharks. He forged the signature. I was just a hostage. I am a victim here." Darius stared at her. He stopped struggling against the officers. He just watched his wife, the woman he had tried to kill his own father for, rewrite history to save her own skin. I saw the light go out in his eyes. It was not just defeat. It was the total annihilation of his worldview. He realized he had sold his soul for a woman who would trade him for a plea deal in a heartbeat. The room was a chaotic swirl of blue lights, shouting voices, and medical urgency. The Kings were being questioned by a detective in the corner, stammering excuses, trying to distance themselves from their daughter and son-in-law. We did not know Robert King was saying, his voice shaking. We thought it was a celebration. We are victims too. I stood in the corner near the shattered glass wall, watching it all. I felt a strange sense of detachment. I was in the room, but I was not part of it. I was like a ghost haunting the ruins of my former life. Ms. Sterling approached me. She moved through the chaos like a shark through water, calm and untouched. She held a leather clipboard and a heavy fountain pen. She stopped beside me and looked down at Darius, who was being hauled to his feet by the officers. "Is it time?" she asked. I looked at my son. He was weeping openly now, loud, racking sobs that shook his entire body. He looked at me. His eyes were pleading, terrified. "Dad," he croaked. "Dad, please. Tell them it was a mistake. Help me." I looked at him. I looked for a spark of the little boy I had taught to fish. I looked for the teenager I had taught to drive. I looked for the young man I had hoped would take over my empire, but all I saw was a stranger who had put a tracker on my truck, a stranger who had hired a hitman, a stranger who had held a gun to my head. I did not feel anger anymore. The anger had burned itself out, leaving only cold, gray ash. I did not feel sadness. I felt nothing. It was over. I took the pen from Sterling. I looked at the document on the clipboard. It was a formal declaration of disownment. It was a restraining order permanently severing all legal and familial ties. And it was a directive to the board of Freeman Logistics liquidating the trust fund I had set aside for Darius and donating every single cent to the victims fund we had discussed. $20 million. Gone. I signed my name. The ink flowed smooth and black. Bernard Freeman. It was the easiest signature I had ever written. It was not just a signature. It was an amputation. I was cutting off the gangrenous limb to save the body. I handed the clipboard back to Sterling. "It is done," I said. "File it immediately," I instructed. "I want the assets transferred before the sun comes up. By the time he calls for a lawyer, I want him to know there is nothing left to fight for." Sterling nodded, taking the clipboard. "Consider it done, Mr. Freeman. Do you want to make a statement to the police now?" "Not now," I said, adjusting my cuffs. "Cyrus has the recordings. He has the photos. He has the evidence. My statement can wait until tomorrow. Right now I need fresh air." I turned my back on my son. Dad, Darius screamed as the officers began to drag him toward the freight elevator. "Dad, do not leave me. Dad." I did not look back. I walked toward the main elevator, the one reserved for guests. I walked past the shattered glass, past the blood stain on the carpet, past the weeping in-laws who were realizing they were now linked to a violent felony. I pressed the button. The doors slid open. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, cutting off the sound of my son's screaming, I caught my reflection in the polished metal of the elevator walls. I looked tired. I looked older. But for the first time in a long time, I looked free. The night air rushing past the open convertible top of my vintage Mercedes felt like a cleansing baptism. But even as I drove away from the tower, I knew the echo of my son's sins was not fully silenced. Darius was in custody, and Paige was in the hospital under police guard, but the ledger they had created was still bleeding red ink. $500,000. That was the number Darius had borrowed from men who did not use contracts or credit scores, men who used fear as their currency. I turned off the main boulevard and took the shortcut through the industrial district, a route I had driven 1,000 times in my trucks back in the early days. The streetlights here were sparse, flickering yellow bulbs that cast long, dancing shadows against the brick walls of old factories. It was quiet. Too quiet. I checked my rearview mirror. A pair of headlights had been tracking me for the last 3 blocks. They were maintaining a steady distance, not too close, but refusing to fade away. I glanced ahead. Another set of lights flickered on from a side alley, pulling out to block the narrow 2-lane road. It was a classic pincer movement. I did not panic. I did not slam on the brakes or try to spin the car around. I simply slowed the Mercedes to a smooth stop, letting the engine idle. The car behind me pulled up tight, cutting off my retreat. The car in front sat sideways across the asphalt, its high beams blinding me. I put the car in park. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, listening to the hum of my engine and the thud of heavy doors slamming shut in the darkness. I knew who they were. This was Russo's crew. They had been watching the tower, waiting for Darius to come out with the money. When the police cars swarmed the building and dragged Darius out in cuffs, they realized their payday was evaporating. They were businessmen in their own violent way, and they were not going to write off $500,000 without a conversation. They assumed that since the son was out of reach, the father would pay. They assumed that because I was driving a restored convertible and wearing a bespoke suit, I was soft. They were about to make the same mistake my family had made. Shadows detached themselves from the vehicles. 5 men. They walked with the heavy, confident swagger of predators who believe the prey is trapped. They carried objects in their hands, baseball bats and tire irons, silhouettes of blunt force trauma. I reached for my phone, which was sitting in the center console. I did not dial 911. I pressed a single speed dial button programmed hours ago. I let it ring once, then hung up. Then I waited. The men surrounded the car. The leader, a man with a scar running through his eyebrow and a neck as thick as a tree trunk, leaned down. He tapped the barrel of a bat against my polished door. It made a dull, hollow sound that made me wince, not out of fear for my safety, but for the paint job. "Get out of the car, Mr. Freeman," the man said. His voice was like gravel in a cement mixer. I looked at him. I did not move to open the door. "I am comfortable right here," I said. The man laughed a short bark of amusement. He did not see a threat. He saw an old man in a fancy car trapped in a dark alley. "We need to talk about your son," he said, leaning closer so I could smell the stale tobacco on his breath. "Darius owes Mr. Russo a lot of money, 500 large, and since Darius is currently a guest of the state, we figure his daddy can settle the tab." I looked at the bat, resting near my headrest. "My son is a grown man," I said, keeping my voice level. "His debts are his own. I did not sign for that loan. In fact, he forged my signature to get it. That makes the contract void." The man smiled, revealing yellow teeth. "We are not banks, Mr. Freeman. We do not care about signatures or forgery. We care about cash. And we know you have it. We saw you at the View. We know you own the place. So you are going to write us a check, or we are going to take this car, this watch, and maybe a few of your fingers as a down payment." The other men chuckled, shifting their weapons. They began to circle tighter, closing the distance. One of them reached for the door handle. I sighed. It was a sigh of genuine disappointment. I had hoped they would be smarter than this. I had hoped they would do their homework. "If you touch this car," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "you are going to regret it." The leader sneered. "Is that right, old man? And who is going to make us regret it? You!" He raised the bat, preparing to smash the windshield to make his point. That is when the ground began to shake. It started as a low vibration, a rumble that you could feel in the soles of your feet before you heard it. Then came the sound, the deep guttural roar of massive diesel engines revving in unison. The leader froze the bat, hovering in the air. He looked around confused. Bright white floodlights suddenly blazed to life from both ends of the alley, turning the night into day. The thugs squinted, shielding their eyes. 3 massive black semi-trucks bearing the silver logo of Freeman Logistics rolled into view. They did not stop. They pushed forward their grills like walls of steel, closing in on the smaller cars blocking the road. They boxed the gangsters in, completely crushing the bumpers of their sedans with a sickening crunch of metal. Air brakes hissed violently. The doors of the trucks opened. 10 men stepped out. These were not street thugs. These were my private security team men I recruited from special forces and overseas contracting jobs. They wore tactical gear. They held military-grade rifles, not baseball bats. They moved with silent, disciplined precision, forming a perimeter around my convertible. The leader of the gang lowered his bat slowly. His face went from arrogant to pale in the span of 3 seconds. He looked at the rifles pointed at his chest. He looked at his men who were already dropping their tire irons and raising their hands. I opened my car door and stepped out. I adjusted my suit jacket and walked around to face the leader. He shrank back involuntarily, hitting the side of my car. "You asked who was going to make you regret it," I said calmly. I gestured to the wall of armed men and steel trucks surrounding us. "This is Freeman Logistics. We move cargo all over the world. We deal with pirates in Somalia and cartels in Mexico. Do you really think a few boys with baseball bats scare me?" The leader swallowed hard. He looked at me with new eyes. He finally saw the shark beneath the suit. "Mr. Freeman," he stammered, his voice trembling, "we did not know. We just want the money. It is just business." "Business," I repeated, stepping into his personal space. "Let me explain business to you. My son Darius tried to kill me. He is dead to me. His debts died with him. If Russo wants his money, he can go to the county jail and ask Darius for it. Maybe he can pay you in cigarettes." I leaned closer, my eyes locking onto his. "But you," I said, pointing a finger at his chest, "you are bothering me, and I do not like being bothered." I turned and pointed toward the end of the street where the city lights glowed. "You operate out of the warehouse on 5th Street right, the one behind the pawn shop." The leader's eyes widened. "How did you know that?" "I own the mortgage on that building," I said. "I own the mortgage on the pawn shop too. In fact, I own the mortgage on most of this district." I took a step back, looking him up and down with disdain. "Here is the new deal. You are going to get in your cars and you are going to leave. You are going to tell Russo that Bernie Freeman is off limits. If I see you again, if I even hear a rumor that you are looking for me, I will foreclose on your headquarters tomorrow morning. I will buy the land. I will bulldoze it. And I will turn your little operation into a hazardous waste dump." The leader stared at me. He looked at the soldiers behind me. He looked at the trucks that could crush his car flat without slowing down. He realized he was out of his league. He was playing checkers and I was playing 4D chess with live ammunition. "We are leaving," he whispered. "We are going." "Good," I said. I waited. They scrambled back into their cars. They had to reverse awkwardly, scraping against the walls to get out of the trap. The Freeman Logistics trucks backed up just enough to let them squeeze through. I watched them flee their taillights, disappearing into the darkness like frightened rats. Cyrus stepped out from behind one of the trucks, a shotgun resting casually on his shoulder. He grinned. "That was dramatic, Bernie. It needed to be," I said, getting back into my car. "They respect force, Cyrus. Nothing else." I started the engine. "Is it over?" Cyrus asked, leaning on my door. I looked at the empty street. I looked at the sky. "Yes," I said, "it is over." I drove home. Not to the old ranch house. I never went back there. I drove to the penthouse at the tower. I slept in a bed that cost $10,000, surrounded by silence. It was lonely, but it was safe. 6 months later, I sat in the back of the courtroom. I watched as the judge read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, forgery, attempted murder. Darius stood up to hear his sentence. He looked small. His expensive suit hung off him loosely. He had lost 20 pounds in county jail. His hair was thinning. He looked like an old man. 20 years. No parole for 15. Paige got the same. She sobbed when the gavel came down, screaming that it was not fair that she was a victim. Nobody listened. As the bailiffs led Darius away, he turned and scanned the gallery. He saw me. He stopped. He pressed his hands against the railing. "Dad." He cried out, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "Dad, please. I am sorry. I learned my lesson. Use your money. Get me a better lawyer. Get me out of here. Please, Dad." The room went quiet. Everyone looked at me. The wealthy businessman in the back row. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I looked at the man who shared my blood, but not my heart. I walked to the railing. I looked him in the eye. "Money is for family." "Darius," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the room, "I would spend every dime I have to save my family." I paused, letting the words sink in. "But the man who tried to kill me is not my family." I turned my back on him. I walked out of the courtroom. I heard him screaming my name, but I did not stop. I did not look back. Outside, the sun was shining. Cyrus was waiting for me by the curb, leaning against a brand-new convertible, bright red with a fishing rod in the back seat. "Ready to go?" he asked, opening the door. I got in. I took a deep breath of fresh air. "Where to?" Cyrus asked. "Alaska," I said. "I hear the salmon are running, and I have a lot of frequent flyer miles to use." We drove away, leaving the courthouse, the prison, and the past in the rearview mirror. I had lost a son. It was a wound that would never fully heal, but I had saved myself. I had cut out the rot so the tree could live. And as we hit the highway, speeding toward a future that was finally mine, I realized something important. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the people who share your DNA and build a life with the people who share your values. That is the true legacy of Bernie Freeman. And it is one I am proud to own. The gavel fell with a sound like a heavy stone dropping into deep water. It was the final period at the end of a very long and ugly sentence. 6 months had passed since the night at the View. 6 months of depositions, hearings, and the slow grinding wheels of justice. I sat in the back row of the courtroom, my hands resting on the head of a cane I did not really need but liked for the aesthetic. I watched the backs of two people I once would have died for. Darius and Paige stood before the judge. They did not look like the power couple they had pretended to be. They looked like what they were. Two desperate criminals who had gambled everything on a shortcut and lost. The orange jumpsuits washed out their complexions. Darius was shaking. Paige was sobbing softly, her shoulders heaving. The judge did not mince words. Conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, forgery, possession of an illegal firearm. The list of their sins was long. 20 years, the judge said. 20 years in a state penitentiary with no possibility of parole for 15. I watched Paige collapse, her legs giving out as if her bones had turned to water. She screamed something about being a victim, about being coerced, but the bailiffs were already moving in. Darius did not scream. He just turned around. He scanned the room, his eyes wild and fearful until they locked onto mine. I could have left then. I could have walked out and never looked back. But I needed one last thing. I needed to say goodbye, not to the criminals, but to the ghost of the son I thought I had. I went to the holding area. I sat on a metal stool in a room that smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. There was a thick pane of reinforced glass between us. Darius sat on the other side. He looked 20 years older than he was. His hair was thinning. His skin was sallow. He picked up the black phone receiver. His hand was trembling. I picked up mine. "Dad," he said, his voice tinny and distorted through the speaker. "Dad, I am so sorry. I messed up. I know I messed up. But 20 years. I cannot do 20 years, Dad. I will die in here." I looked at him. I looked at the boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. That boy was gone, replaced by a man who had sold my life for a payout. "Please, Dad." He begged, tears streaming down his face. "You have money. You have so much money. You can hire better lawyers. You can get an appeal. You can get me out of this. Just help me one last time. I promise I will disappear. I will never ask for anything again. Just use the money to save me." I adjusted my silk tie. Silk. I smoothed the lapel of my charcoal suit. I looked him dead in the eye. "Money is for family. Darius," I said, my voice steady and cold, "I would spend every dime I have, every cent of that 20 million to save my family." Darius' face lit up with a flicker of hope. But then I leaned forward. "But the man who put a tracker on my truck is not my family. The man who hired a hitman to run me off a cliff is not my family. The man who tried to poison me in my own bed is not my family. You are just a stranger, Darius, and I do not owe strangers a thing." The hope died in his eyes, replaced by a vast, empty darkness. I hung up the phone. I stood up. I turned my back on the glass, on the pleading man, on the past. I walked out of the room and I did not look back. The next week I sold the house, the ranch on the cul-de-sac where I had lived for 40 years. I did not want it anymore. It was tainted. I sold it to a young couple just starting out, and I gave them a deal they could not refuse because I wanted good energy back in that place. I took the proceeds from the sale, and I combined them with the liquidated trust fund I had originally set aside for Darius. I walked into the technical college down the street, the one where I had learned to fix engines 50 years ago. I sat down with the dean and I wrote a check. It was the Sarah Freeman Scholarship Fund. It was a full-ride scholarship for kids who wanted to be mechanics, kids who had grease under their fingernails and dreams in their hearts but no money in their pockets, kids who were willing to work. I made sure the legal language was ironclad. Not a single penny of my estate would ever go to Darius Freeman or anyone associated with him. If he ever got out of prison, he would find a world where his father's legacy was everywhere but out of his reach. He would see my name on buildings, on scholarships, on the sides of trucks, but he would never touch the wealth he had tried to kill for. That was my justice. The morning sun was bright and crisp, the kind of light that makes everything look new. I stood on the curb outside the airport terminal. A car pulled up. It was not a sensible sedan. It was a brand new cherry red convertible with a V8 engine that purred like a lion. The top was down. Cyrus was behind the wheel, wearing sunglasses and a grin that split his beard. "Get in, old man," he yelled over the engine. "The fish are not going to catch themselves." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh, deep and loud. I tossed my leather duffel bag into the back seat next to a case of expensive scotch and 2 high-end fishing rods. I climbed into the passenger seat. The leather was soft and warm. "Where to?" Cyrus asked, revving the engine. "Alaska," I said, looking at the horizon. "I hear the salmon run is legendary this time of year, and after that maybe Italy. I have always wanted to drive the Amalfi Coast." Cyrus shifted into gear. "Alaska it is." We peeled away from the curb, merging into the traffic, leaving the city, the courtrooms, and the prison far behind. The wind whipped through my hair. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. People say blood is thicker than water. They say family is everything, but they are wrong. Blood is just biology. It is an accident of birth. Character is a choice. Loyalty is an action. Sometimes the most dangerous people in your life are the ones who share your last name. Sometimes the people who want to hurt you the most are the ones sleeping under your roof. I learned the hard way that you cannot save someone who does not want to be saved. You cannot love someone into being a good person. And sometimes the only way to survive, the only way to truly live, is to cut out the cancer, even if that cancer is your own son. I lost a child, but I found myself. I found my dignity. I found my freedom. And as the road stretched out before me, endless and open, I knew that for the first time in a long time, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Driving fast with the wind in my face and my real family sitting right next to me. We spend our lives trying to build a legacy for our children, believing that blood guarantees loyalty. But I learned the hard way that sometimes your family tree is rotten to the roots. You cannot love a predator into a pet, and you cannot buy respect from those who only value your wallet. Real family is not defined by DNA. It is defined by who stands beside you when the world turns dark. Cutting off my son was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. Never set yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. Your peace is the only luxury that truly matters. If you enjoyed this story of justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments, would you have given your son a second chance, or did he get exactly what he deserved?